I'm going to open our meeting, and I apologize that we've been so late coming from closed session where nothing was voted on or accomplished, really, but we did do a lot of discussion, and sometimes things do need to be talked out. So I appreciate your patience with that. We are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Jacob Petrick, a sixth grader from Woodcrest Elementary School. Jacob?
All rise. Please join me in the flag salute. Please put your right hand over your heart. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Thank you, Jacob. I have some nice things to say about you, so stay up here if you would. Woodcrest Elementary School is proud to have Jacob Petrick representing their community and leading the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. He is a sixth grader in Ms. Bates' classroom. He is a responsible, competitive, hardworking young man. Beginning in kindergarten, he has achieved many awards through his educational experience at Woodcrest. Last year, he received a Principal's Award and moved to the Nationals for his science fair project. That's very impressive. His favorite subject is math. In fact, he has been the top player in First Math many times. His top three favorite sports are baseball, soccer, and basketball. He plans on attending USC in the future, Mr. Hunt.
Let's talk.
His dream is to become a professional baseball player. Woodcrest is proud of Jacob Petrick and all of his many accomplishments. We look forward to hearing about this young man's accomplishments in the future.
Yes, I'd like to thank my dad, Ryan Petrick, my brother, Michael Petrick, and my mom, Michelle Petrick. And my principal, Miss Ekman, and one of the teachers from sixth grade, Miss Moore.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you very much. Thank you. And it is, Jacob, it's okay if you and your family need to get home and work on homework or something. That's quite all right. We will understand. And now we have our chance for public input, but I don't see any cards. Okay, well, we'll move right along to our high school representatives. Tonight is the first night that we have high school representatives, and I'm very excited to have them. If you could, please tell us what class you're in as well as what you are doing in school yourself personally and extracurricularly. Our first representative is Enrique Moreno from Arlington High School.
Good evening, Madam President Alavi, Superintendent Dr. Hanson, and all other board members. My name is Enrique Moreno, and I am the representative for Arlington. Arlington's school year has started in spectacular fashion. Roar, which is Arlington's brand new Link Crew, assigned freshman teams to junior and senior leaders to welcome. Over the course of 4 hours, freshmen participated in activities and games specifically designed to address students' concerns and needs in a fun and interactive way. I'd like to thank Mr. Brubaker, Link Crew Advisor at King, for assisting our activities director in the process of beginning a brand new program. The second project, Principal Schmeckel and the team of freshman teachers began school-wide AVID with the class of 2019. The team has 3 main points: organization, marking the text in the margins, and focused note-taking. The 4th annual Spirit Social was Thursday, August 27th. Students learned the culture and spirit of Lion Pride. Roy leaders personally invited their freshmen. Spirit leaders of cheer, dance, and ASB taught the crowd the AHS fight song. Several chants and students played games like tug-of-war and Four Corners. Fall Club Rush was Wednesday, September 9th at lunch. 30 clubs set up in the gym, and more than 600 students came to check out what clubs that were offered and signed up to participate. Our club advisors and student representatives have also kicked off the year of Interclub Council. This unique group represents the different clubs on campus working together to create a stronger culture of involvement on campus. When the ICC began last year, there were 17 active clubs. Now there are 30 and more being started weekly. Our fall school-wide community service project is scheduled for October 3rd in partnership with Keep Riverside Clean and Beautiful and Riverside Park and Rec. We will be cleaning up at Fairmont Park. In the athletic realm, our fall athletic teams have begun competition, with most entering league play this week. We held a Roar tailgate at our first football game of the season on Friday, September 4th, and experienced a great showing for our student section. The Lions Den and on the gridiron, with a win over the La Sierra Eagles, we hosted the September 11th Patriot Game, where we honored our active and retired military servicemen and women. Mayor Rusty Bailey participated in the honorary coin toss, and we recognized each branch at halftime, and patriotic performances from cheer and dance. Our intramural athletic program has kicked off this week with 15 teams in a 5-week season of soccer. Teams play 3 days a week at lunch. As of today, homecoming is in full effect. Our theme is Main Street AHS. The Lions are taking over Disney with dress-up days and lunchtime activities. Our first pep rally of the year is Friday. The gym will be made over into Disneyland and our rally script into the Main Street Parade, including our full marching band and color guard leading the parade. You're all more than welcome to join us on Friday morning at 9:45 for the show. The homecoming football game will be held Friday with pregame at 6:30 p.m. with a parade of Arlington alumni. The dance will be held on Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrique. Can you tell us something about it? What grade are you in?
I'm a senior.
What are you involved in extracurricular? Are you on the student union, ASB?
I'm in National Honor Society, where I'm the president. CSF,
Good.
Associated Student Body, ASB,
Good.
and I'm senior vice president.
Very good. Very impressive. Does anyone have any questions?
Who are we playing for the homecoming?
What was that?
Who are we playing for the homecoming? Room of the World, okay.
Room of the World.
The Scots, all right, very good. Out there. So what are your plans, Enrique? You're beginning to fill out applications that you'll wait for chewing on your nails in February?
Yes, I'm actually applying to 4 UCs, UC Irvine, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, and UC Riverside. And I'd like to go to UC Irvine to major in biological sciences and minor in biomedical engineering.
Excellent.
Very impressive. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you very much. Did Eric come in from Martin Luther King? Oh, Eric. Oh, there you are. Talk about perfect timing. No, that's all right. That's all right. Come up ahead. You can, yeah, you can give them to Mrs. Lockdawson. She can pass those along. Go right ahead. You were just like perfect timing.
Good evening, Madam President Alavi, Dr. Hanson, and members of the board. My name is Eric Manavong, and I am the student representative of Martin Luther King High School. I am honored to be here today to be representing my school and inform you of all the wonderful things that we have done so far this year. With just over 3,300 students at our school, King High started a new school year busier than ever before. Freshmen had a chance to learn the way around campus on freshman first day, which was held by a club known as Link Crew. Members of Linker receive a group of freshmen that they are responsible for showing around campus and helping them with anything they needed at all. Members of this club stay in contact with their freshmen and try to make sure that they have an amazing first year of high school. The night of Freshman First Dance, King ASB held the first ever Freshman First Dance. That night, freshmen learned and enjoyed the fun times that high school will bring them. The class of 2019 just had a taste of what was yet to come, such as homecoming, winter formal, and prom. On September 4th, our varsity football team had an amazing game against Great Oak. We called this exciting game Battle of the Packs, since both our mascots are wolves. Before the game, however, Link Crew hosted an awesome tailgate for the freshmen. This encouraged many of the freshmen to come out and support our wolves against Great Oak. With the grand opening of our Red Zone, which is our absolutely outstanding student section, many students came out to support. With the Red Zone's loud and constant support, our wolves were able to defeat Great Oak in double overtime. This has brought an enormous amount of school spirit to our students as freshmen were able to experience their first high school football game. The week of September 14th through the 18th, ASB held an event that lasted through the week known as Club Rush Week. During this week, all 70 of our exceptional clubs set up tables and chairs out at lunch and tried to have students sign up for their clubs. This was a great opportunity for freshmen and new students to get to see all the clubs, find one that they like, and get involved. A big part of our school is to be involved and have school spirit. Also during this week, we had dress-up days, which were rivalry week. Some of these dress-ups were superhero versus villains, USC versus UCLA, and Angels versus Dodgers, although Mr. West wore a Giants jersey for some reason. This was to encourage and to get the students excited for our rival game against Poly. All of our sports are off to a great start and are preparing to enter league matches. Thursday, September 17th, King High had back-to-school night, with many parents coming out to visit our hardworking teachers and to get involved with their child. They got to experience a senior parent workshop. This workshop went over senior testing, financial aid, and college applications. This was a brief overview of King High School's accomplishments thus far, and we are excited about what this year has for us. It's great to be King.
Thank you, Eric. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like what grade you're in and what things you're involved in?
This year, I'm a junior, and like the clubs I'm in this year, including ASB, is DECA, ISU, BSU, and ASU.
Wow. Okay, good. That's great. That's a lot of involvement. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Can I just add?
Sure.
I appreciate Eric and Enrique really dressing professionally.
Yes.
You bring a new highlight to our board meeting, and you're looking good, I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I ditto that. That's very nice. Thank you very much. And now we have Tatiana Turner from Abraham Lincoln High School. Tatiana? Is not Tatiana. Oh, we did, because you don't look like a Tatiana. So what is your name? Christian. And your last name? Fitch. Christian Fitch from Abraham Lincoln High School. Okay, Christian, go ahead.
Good evening, Madam President Alavi, Dr. Hanson, and members of the board. My name is Christian Fitch. I am the new student representative for Abraham Lincoln High School, and I'll be looking forward to representing this year. I am a senior and will graduate with the class of 2016. Now I will share with you some exciting and important things about Lincoln. We have had a very successful opening for the school year. Students are particularly excited about our new sports program and additional electives such as yearbook and Spanish. We are also happy to have more access to technology. Administration and other Lincoln stakeholders have been ardently preparing for our WASC accreditation self-study visit scheduled for March 7th to the 9th. The purpose of the committee is to review whether or not the school is doing everything possible to support high achievement for all students. We are pleased to report that Lincoln has put many new programs in place to meet the recommendations of the last visiting committee. Back to School Night is scheduled for October 14th. A letter of invite will be mailed home as well as an audio dialer reminder. Plans are to start the evening with a barbecue, followed with an introduction of staff and an overview of our programs by Ms. Mashana. We are anticipating an enjoyable and informative evening. This is a great opportunity for parents to visit classrooms and meet their students' teachers. Finally, Lincoln welcomes 3 new teachers to the school year. Sylvia Costellos, who is teaching Spanish and online learning. Kevin Smith teaches physical education and math. And Jamila Varese, our new social studies and English teacher. We are excited to have them on board as part of our Lincoln family. Once again, thank you for this opportunity. This concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Mrs. Cloud?
There's 2 questions. One is, what are you doing this year? And are you just a sub? And then you're looking good too, Christian, I have to say.
Thank you. I'm involved as student rep at my school. I do community service with the cafeteria, and I do morning announcements along with men's group.
Excellent. Are you a senior?
Yes, I'm a senior, and I'm not the substitute. I'm the
You're the real
student
deal.
rep.
Yeah.
Well, we're really glad to have you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You did a great job, high school reps, but if you need to go now and work on stuff, I totally understand, so feel free to leave. Thank you. And now we will have our district superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam President Alvey, and I too want to commend the student reps. I had a privilege last week to meet all of our student reps from all the high schools, and look forward to having the other 4 come and join us in the next meeting. For the district superintendent report, I'd like to invite Assistant Superintendent Renee Hill to the podium to update the board on the last week. You knew that you're aware that the new SBAC test scores were released to the community, and they'll also be mailed home to our students here in the near future, and she'll provide us an update.
So good evening, Mrs. Alvey, Dr. Hanson, and members of the board. Our student reports have begun arriving in the district, and they will be mailed out to homes. Should be arriving mid-October or so. So our communications team put together a short information-filled video about the Smarter Balance assessments overall, including a little bit about the reports, and we'd like to share that with you now.
I always get asked, what do I want to be when I grow up? Sometimes I want to be an astronaut, sometimes a doctor. Just yesterday, I decided I wanted to develop mobile apps. Most times, I just give an answer that'll sound good to whoever's asking. Honestly, I have no idea. That's because most of the jobs that will exist when I'm 20 don't even exist today. All I know is that I want to change the world and make it a better place. Things around me are changing so fast. There are so many options out there. I need to learn how to solve complex problems, write a business plan, develop lines of code, and maybe even create a cool video, like the one you're watching. This is why our schools here in California have adopted new state educational standards. These standards were developed by educators to make sure that all students, like me, graduate from high school with the skills and knowledge necessary to succeed in college, career, and in the world, no matter where I move to or what I plan to do. These days, I'm not just competing with students in California. I'm competing with students all over the world, and I want to be prepared for that challenge. Did you know that almost all of the things we do in school now involve some kind of modern technology? Even testing. Last school year, I took the Smarter Balance assessment test entirely on a computer. And that's pretty cool. You see, it's adaptive, meaning it changes based on how well or poorly I'm doing. It also tells me what skills I need to brush up on. It's easy to understand, it works, and I kind of like it. Before, and you'll remember this one, we used to get a paper with a bunch of bubbles on it, a number 2 pencil, and a test booklet, and every student would get the same questions. Now, we take our tests on a computer, and each student sees different questions that are matched to our level of understanding. Before, my only options were A, B, C, and D. Now, it's much more interactive. I get to answer multiple choice questions, fill in blanks, and even construct written responses. Before, my test results would be a number score or a percentile. Now, the results are more specific to me. They tell us how well I solved different problems, what I struggled with, what areas I need to improve on, and where I really succeeded. So, why is this important? The first thing you should know about the test is that it's aligned with the California state standards, as well as other college assessment tests. Don't be intimidated by the score sheet. My score will fall into one of 4 levels. Remember, it's a new test, so there's a new scoring system, and it also tells teachers and parents how well I'm understanding the material in school. So try not to look at my scores to find out if I'm passing or not. That's not what it's for. This test looks at how I'm doing in different areas related to my college readiness. Just a heads up, my scores may seem lower than they were before, but that doesn't mean I've regressed. In fact, many scores across the country are coming in lower simply because we're pioneering a new test. And it's not even really comparable to the old test. Not to mention, we've been introduced to new materials this entire year. So, what's next? How do I improve? Well, first of all, it makes me feel really awesome when my parents are involved in my learning. You don't always have to help me with my homework, because you may or may not remember how to do quadratic equations, but you can talk to my teachers for more information about my progress, or maintain regular communication with my school. You can look at our district website for more resources, and you can make sure I make it to school every day. Oops, did I say that? As I said earlier, I'm not really sure what I want to be when I grow up, but I do know that I want to be successful, healthy, and happy. So I definitely need your help. Studies show that parental involvement is one of the most important factors when it comes to my success. The new state standards bring students, parents, teachers, and technology together. So, no matter what I decide to be or where I decide to go, I'll be ready for what comes my way.
So that will be posted, there'll be a link posted to the district website, and there'll be some more resources that go more in depth. The Department of Ed has a nice overview letter, and also a video that goes step by step through each portion of the report, but this is a good overview.
Thank you, Renee. And I'd like to express appreciation to our new Public Information Officer, Justin Grayson, and the whole Ed Services team, and the leadership of Mrs. Carmody for preparing this for the public and getting the information out there. And we just want to share it with the board. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. I think it's just a great video, and it's colorful, it keeps your interest. And I was telling Justin earlier that I really like the voice of the young lady who does the over-talking. I think she sounds young and compelling, so it's really positive. All right, well, now we are here for a wonderful study session on the general obligation bond measure, and I will now ask for Dr. Lewis to come up.
Mrs. Alavey, Dr. Hanson, members of the board, it's my pleasure to bring to you the full presentation. What I did on October 17th was provide you just a preview of tonight's presentation, which we'll dig in deeper, and you'll have the opportunity to speak directly and interact with our consultants, our bond team, and as a study session and in true to the format, feel free to ask questions at any time. I want to acknowledge that I have Ken and Kevin recording your comments and questions, so we have a record of that, and we'll be able to follow up with you at a later date. In 2000, when we were working with Measure B, we assembled a bond planning team that was successful in moving forward with a bond that passed at 68%, which was the first Prop 39 bond in the area, and we felt very proud of that. For this bond planning effort, we've assembled what I would say is a team of consultants that have worked together in preparing information and developing information so that eventually you can make an informed decision about our future direction concerning the bond election for 2016. So what I'm going to do is briefly introduce these folks, and many of them will be directly making presentations, and they can elaborate on that a bit later. What I want to comment on is on the left-hand side, you see our district staff that's involved with the bond team. We have our executive leadership, and our executive leadership is important that you should know that they've all been involved with previous bond measures and the passage of bond measures, so they bring a wealth of experience and leadership with past bond measures as well as this one. Haley Calhoun is doing our point with our master planning process and working with the architects, and she'll introduce those folks in a minute. Justin is instrumental in our process in that he's helping with the outreach effort and discussion with community groups and high profile individuals, and also with presenting a communication plan and advice to our principals. Moving to our consultants on the right-hand side, Jared Boygan, you've met with TBWB Strategies. He's had a wealth of experience in doing strategy for campaigns in the Inland Empire, and we're very happy to have him on our team. Joy Tatarka is also working with us, and she's been primarily helpful in our outreach efforts. I'd like to also present Tim McClarney from True North Research. He's our survey consultant, and I think you'll find his not only his approach to the survey process, but his skills and analyzing the data is going to be very pivotal for you tonight. Adam Bauer and Tim Carty from our financial advisors and underwriter services, and they've teamed up and have done an outstanding job with us, and will continue to do it through the entire process. Kim Byermans couldn't be here tonight from Best and Creeker. She's our bond counsel. She'll principally be involved in writing the ballot language and statement, also the preliminary and official statements, and preparing for selling bonds. So we've had a number of meetings, as you can see on the slide, and we'll continue to do that throughout the process. So now I'd like to introduce Maze Kakish, and she'll talk to you about the board priorities and LCAP as it relates to our process.
Good evening, our Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Hansen. I just wanted to make sure that our board knows that all the team that's present here tonight have been reminded of our LCAP goals and our board priorities based on the last time we met as a board retreat this summer. We've identified 4 areas. And so for our LCAP, which goes hand in hand with the bond initiative that we're trying to do, provide high-quality teaching and learning environment for all of our students. We can't really accomplish that LCAP goal without making sure that our facilities are up to par to handle that. And prepare students to be college and career ready. This comes in and out.
Yes.
And world ready upon graduation, including increase in percentage of students who graduate college and career ready, increase quality opportunities for career pathways. And that also needs the facilities to handle those pathways that are current and additional ones that we would bring through the LCAP. Fully engage students, parents, and the community in support of educational outcomes. And our facilities also need to be inviting in a way that actually those settings could happen. As far as board priorities, we talked in length about how we can incorporate visual and performing arts, education, career technical education, counseling, and the areas where that could happen with the students in both behavior and in career and college counseling. Innovative programs, and this is just example of STEM, DLI, which is actually science, technology, engineering, and math, and dual language immersion, and core knowledge. Just examples of innovative programs that we'll continue to look at and include in our programs. So I know our team would recite those blindly, right? You've already memorized them. They're part of our every step of the way as we move towards this bond. Thank you.
I think we're going to have to speak right into that mic. It's kind of going in and out. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next up is Jared Boykin. He will lead from District Communications onward.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lewis. President Alvey, members of the board, Dr. Hanson, Jared Boygan with TBWB Strategies, and my colleague Joy and I will help walk you through the rest of the presentation today, although there's going to be a lot of detail coming up. So the first thing we wanted to point out is just kind of some timelines of meetings and conversations internally that have already happened. Your staff's been, very, very busy, in some of these meetings with architects, which you'll hear more about later, but also internally keeping principals and staff leadership up to date and really starting to make sure that there's a lot of input and opportunity for people to be part of this process. You started early, you've got plenty of time for that. We want to make sure that that's happened. So just here's a note of some of the conversations that have taken place. And from a big picture perspective, because in our minds, we want to get you ready to make a very confident decision as a board next year at some point. We'll talk a little bit more about exactly when that is today. But also, we want to feel like you're in a position to succeed when you put this in front of voters. So there's several big picture things that we like to see stay on track, and they generally fall into two categories. There's an internal planning component, which has both a facilities and a financing piece to it. And then there's an external communications component. And that communications component also has sort of an internal RUSD community, which includes staff, teachers, parents, administrators, as well as the external, the voters and the taxpayers who no longer have kids in your schools or maybe never did, but who also have an important role in this process. So we like to see all of those pieces moving forward together in order to put you on track to be successful. So far, several of those boxes have been checked. We talked about some of this in February when I was in front of you last. Initial financing scenarios were put together by our capable financing team. We tested them in the voter survey, which you're going to hear about in a little bit. And after the voter survey, in fact, Adam Bauer and Tim Carty will get up and talk a little bit about the financing scenarios themselves, and so you can talk a little bit about their assumptions there and what happened. We've got some initial public materials ready, and this is important as we all spoke in February about the importance of all being on the same page and reading from the same book as we go out to the community. One of the strengths of this district is you have a wonderfully committed, broad group of ambassadors. There are a lot of allies in this district, people who care deeply about you and what you do for kids. But we have to make sure everybody has sort of the same thematic talking points about a potential facilities bond, or people who hear them and hear from well-intentioned people will feel like maybe they're hearing different things from different people and they might get the wrong message. So we want to be sure that as the communication increases and expands and the audience grows, that we are all highlighting the same common theme. So we've got some very broad-based public materials that are ready and can be used now. They are in concert with the facilities master plan outreach that's already taking place at sites. And some basic frequently asked questions type data that's already been prepared for people who start to get wind and say, hey, what's going on here? We need to know a little bit more. And then finally, stakeholder outreach planning has already begun in earnest, which is to make sure that those, as I said, in the inner circle of the RUSD community, which can be site leaders and more broadly teachers, parents, students obviously, but then also the external audiences. And we want to make sure that we have a chance to get in front of folks like the Chamber of Commerce and like the mayor and individual council members and others whose opinions matter and who need to be talked to before we get too far down the road. So those pieces are in place, and then as you're going to hear about coming up, we've got the long-range facilities master plan well in process. Very helpful, very important, a lot of site-based outreach, which you'll hear about, and as I mentioned, a lot of community and external community engagement. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Tim McClarney from True North Research. He's going to present the results of the bond feasibility survey. And I'm going to join him up here and provide occasional color commentary as he goes through this, but he's going to do the bulk of the presentation.
Thanks, Jared. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Hanson. I'm Tim McClarney. I'm the president of True North Research, and we're a firm that specializes in working with California school districts as well as other agencies around the state in doing surveys like this to develop a statistically reliable understanding of the communities and the customers they serve through survey research. I'm going to do my best to speak into this without cutting out or
It really is cutting out. So
Yeah.
do your best. Do your best.
Yeah, okay. I may just talk loud and above
Yeah,
it if that works for
that
you.
works
It's
too.
probably a little easier. To date, my business partner and I have worked on over 900 research studies for public agencies, and about 300 of those are what we call revenue measure feasibility studies, where the goal is to understand if it's feasible to move forward with a revenue measure. And by that, I mean, do you have a reasonable chance of success? And if it is feasible, how you go about structuring that measure in a way that it's going to be supported ultimately at Election Day and is consistent with what your voters would like to see in a measure like that. To date, we've helped raise over $24 billion at the local level. We have about a 92% success rate for measures that we recommend to go to ballot, and we actually have a 100% success rate track record in the Inland Empire. We've worked with Corona Norco, Temecula Valley, Murrieta Valley, Paris, Val Verde, Moreno Valley, and a couple others. And so I mention that because as I go through tonight's presentation, we might, in response to your questions, or as I go through the presentation, I might make reference to how the results we're seeing here in Riverside compare to what we have seen in other districts, some of which have gone on and been successful, and I wanted you to have a sense for the context and my experience for those references. You'll find, as I go through this, that your results are exceptional in a number of ways, good ways, and that's positive, but as I mentioned that, it's nice to know sort of some of the school districts that I'm comparing to. I also welcome questions from the board as I go or at the end, whichever is your preference. Okay, now before I talk about the actual results, let me take a moment to review the methodology of the study. Methodology, just a fancy word for how we went about doing this study. This was a telephone-based survey conducted in June of this year. We spoke with 402 voters who are what we call likely November 2016 voters. These are individuals who we would expect to cast a ballot on the natural in the upcoming November election. Now, within that November universe, there's also a subset of individuals who are also likely to participate in the primary. So these are likely June 2016 voters. We, in this survey, tonight's presentation, you're going to be seeing the November results, but I'll make comments about how the results from the November universe compare to that June universe, which is a smaller turnout, different profile, and tends to be a more tax adverse group because they tend to be older and more conservative.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Are these people self-identified voters?
No, what we do is we go to the voter file, and we first want to see everybody who's registered. Then within that, the voter file contains a lot of information about not just when you registered to vote, but also when you participated in different elections. And so by looking at your demographics as well as your voting history moving backwards, we can identify individuals who, based on the past and based on their profile, we would expect to actually cast the ballot.
So high propensity voters, did you make any effort to make sure that they were from across the district?
Absolutely. So let me take a moment to talk about how we select our sample, and I think you'll feel comfortable about that afterwards.
Okay.
All right, I'm just going to fish.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to try and work with it. What we do is we first look at that likely voter universe based on their voting history and their demographics, and then we use a process called stratification and clustering, which is a fancy word for how we break down that voter file according to characteristics that we know are related to voting behavior, like age, like gender, household party type. So the fact that you're a Republican tells us one thing. The fact that you live with another Republican, we find to be very influential in how you participate and how you vote. And so we look at these characteristics, and then we break your likely voter base down into a variety of different subgroups. We then, if we have 400 clusters, we create 400 clusters, each one of which is representative of a particular profile. So, for example, if I know that 5% of your voters are Democratic females who live with another Democrat or between 40 and 50 years of age and live in a particular part of the district, I make sure that 5% of my clusters represent that profile. We then randomly select people into their appropriate clusters, and we get one interview per cluster. That process ensures that we have a sample that is in fact representative of your likely voter universe on all of those characteristics that matter. And what's beautiful about it is that if I call into somebody and I'm looking for Joe Smith to participate, if Joe Smith isn't there, I can't get a hold of him, or refuses to participate, I replace Joe with another randomly selected individual who happens to share his exact profile in terms of partisanship, age, gender. This is what allows our surveys to be highly accurate, because we can sort of guarantee that at the end of this process we have a sample that's in fact not just random, but is in fact representative of your profile.
Good.
Can I
Thank
ask
you.
a question?
Yes, absolutely, Mrs. Lawrenson.
So stratified, random. Okay. How many groups did we have? How many strata?
Well, we had 400 clusters, right? Each cluster representing a profile. The strata are going to be a multiplier of how many dimensions you use for stratification. We use 4 variables. You're probably talking about, at the end, you wind up with about 50 different cuts or subgroups, but then you're randomly selecting it. Now, because this was a sampling, not a census, it has a margin of error due to sampling, and what that is in this case was plus or minus about 4.9%. That means we can be 95% confident that the results I'm talking about tonight are within plus or minus 4.89% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your likely November voters. Margin of error is a little higher on the June universe because we don't have as many June voters, right? They're a subset within that November universe. And again, everything I'll be talking about tonight are going to be numbers that are based on the larger November electorate. Okay, so on to the results. This first slide is what we call our importance of issue slide, and for each of the issues you see here up on the slide, we simply ask people to tell us how important is this issue to you. Is it extremely important or very important, which are represented by the dark blue and light blue bars? Is it somewhat important or not at all important, which is represented by the negative space off to the right? We ask them in a random order, but we're sorting them here from high to low based on that combined percentage of folks who said it's either extremely important or very important. We ask this question for a couple of reasons. Number one is it's a great warm-up, gets people thinking about local issues. The other is it's an opportunity for us to understand how these education-related items stack up against other issues that compete for tax dollars, right, like maintaining local streets and roads, for example, as well as this issue of preventing local tax increases. And what we want to see in general, it kind of makes sense that when you're thinking about a bond measure, that the education-related items stack up at the top of the list, right? And that there's a sizable gap between those items and in particular that issue of preventing local tax increases, right? The more they care about education when compared to preventing local tax increases, all other things being equal, the more likely you have an electorate that's willing to support some sort of tax measure for education. And that's exactly the pattern that we find here. The top 2 issues were creating jobs and improving the local economy. 90% said extremely or very important, followed by maintaining the quality of education, local schools, which checked in at 88%. As you move down that list, the very bottom, you see preventing local tax increases, right, at 58%. There is a 30-point gap in the percentage of folks who said maintaining the quality of education in local schools is extremely or very important compared to that issue preventing local tax increases. That's on the large side, right? Most of the time when we do this type of analysis, you see gaps that are more like 15, 20, maybe 25%. So that's a large gap. The other lesson, though, that you see in this slide is kind of buried in the middle there is this issue of repairing and renovating aging school facilities. Still checks in as more important than preventing local tax increases, so that's a good thing. But it doesn't test as high as maintaining the quality of education. And there's a lesson in that what voters really care about is the end goal, right? They care about education. Buildings and facilities are instrumental to that, but they don't care about them so much as they care about what those buildings and facilities enable in the classroom. And so to the extent that we talk about a bond, it's always important to sort of connect the dots, right? It's not just about the facilities, it's about what the facilities are going to enable. Okay, now at this point we go right into what we call our initial ballot test. And before we get any deeper into this interview and we start talking in more detail about what this bond would accomplish, arguments pro and con, tax rates, all of these things, we present to voters a mock-up of what we think that 75-word ballot statement could look like and get their reaction. So the language you see here. We ask this early on because it's a really good gauge of where your community is at on the natural with just the information they have right now if you were to present this type of language to them and ask them to vote on it. So the language is shown here, and here are the results. At that initial ballot test, you had 72% of your likely November 2016 electorate say that they would support this bond. You had 17% who were opposed. You had about 11% who were unsure. In the state of California, you need 55% support for a Prop 39 bond. So right at the outset, we are 17 points above that 55% threshold. Goes without saying, that's a great place to start. And one of the things that's interesting is if you dig behind this result, so 72% is everybody. If you dig behind and you start looking at different subgroups that we talked about a little bit from the sampling perspective, so age subgroups, partisanship, household profiles, those sorts of things, there was only one subgroup out of all of them that supported it at under 55%. So it's not just a very strong score overall, it was a widespread support among your electorate. The one thing I will also mention is I mentioned there's also this June environment. June electorate tends to be more older, more conservative, as I mentioned. That translated into support for your bond that was about 9 points lower than the November universe. So you get this 9-point boost in support by having a higher turnout in November when compared to June.
You had a question. Would you just explain again? I'm sorry. Would you just define for us again a Prop 30 vote?
A Prop 39 vote.
Prop 39, sorry.
Prop 39 allows you to pass a bond measure at 55%. It's provided you meet certain conditions.
And does it have a revenue limit?
It does. For a unified, your limit in terms of your tax rate is $60 tax rate is the highest that you can go with. If you're like a elementary school district, the limit's 30.
60?
60 tax rate.
Thank you, sir.
Now, naturally, support for a bond measure can depend in part on the price tag. Right? The higher the cost of this measure to a household, all other things being equal, the lower the level of support you can expect. One of the unique things about bond ballot language that I showed you earlier is it references an aggregate bond amount, so $390 million. It doesn't make it clear that what that $390 million means to the typical homeowner in terms of a tax impact. And so one of the goals of the survey is to make sure that voters understand bonds mean taxes, and also to gauge how support for your bond varies depending on that tax impact of the household. And we test that in two different ways. Up here is shown the traditional way that you talk about the tax impact of a bond, and that is by talking about as a rate per 100,000 of assessed valuation. So we test three different rates, $53, $39, and $28 per 100,000 of assessed valuation in what's called a Dutch auction format. And at each rate, we can gauge how support for your measure varies. What we see is that there is some sensitivity to the tax rate. At the high number, we tested $53 per 100,000 of assessed. You had 51% who said they would support the measure. As you drop that to $39, it jumps to 58%. And at $28 per 100,000 of assessed, it jumps to 65%. And so based on this type of analysis, we'd be looking somewhere around that 39, maybe a bit higher tax rate is where that 55% threshold would be. Now, the other thing we've learned by doing this type of analysis over time is not everybody understands what assessed valuation means. A lot of people, when you talk about assessed valuation, they overestimate what the assessed value would be for their household, particularly in communities where the housing market has declined over time. And so another way to do this is to go ahead and do the math for people and give them an understanding of, well, what does this really translate to in terms of the cost to me on in a typical year? And we do that also in the survey by taking those tax rates and translating them into an annual cost for the typical or median residential property owner. And we test two different amounts here. The first one on the left is the amount of support that we found when we said, okay, let me put it another way. If you knew that this measure was going to cost the typical homeowner about $114 per year, the $114 is based on that $53 tax rate multiplied times the median AV, and you get $114. And what you find is that when you convey it that way, right, you do the math for them and say it's $114, 62% of voters supported that that bond at that rate, and that's about 11 points higher than we talk about it as a rate, right? So remove the uncertainty, do the math for people, and the response you get at that rate is actually higher. Same thing to the right, where we test if somebody wasn't a definitely yes at $114, we go on and ask about, well, what about $60? $60 is the $28 tax rate multiplied times the median AV, and that's how you wind up with $68 per year. And here, again, we see a stronger response when you talk about it as a annualized total than as a rate per 100,000. We had 68% support at that mark.
Sorry, Tim, I just want to jump in a quick second here. So as Tim mentioned, one of the factors in a Prop 39 bond is that the tax rate itself does not appear in the ballot question. So there's a couple of factors in addition to the poll results that we'll go through with you all as before you're asked to settle on an actual tax rate. And after Tim's done with this presentation, I know your financial team will come up and talk a little bit about those assumptions. But we're going to be looking not only at where that 55% threshold is relative to the tax rate and the tax tolerance, but there's some very real factors for you about speed of delivery of projects that we also have to take into account. So there's a balancing because, as you've seen already in the poll results and you'll see as we go through it, there's some passion from your voters for getting some of these improvements made to your schools. And so we wouldn't want to put a financing plan in place that's too conservative and therefore too slow in terms of putting you in a position where you're promising projects you can't deliver over time. There'll be some balance to that.
Yes, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Ms. Alvey. Doctor, just one thing, going back a little bit where you began.
On the rate one?
No, I just want to ask you generally, was you're looking at, did you take into account, and I'm assuming just somewhat, that we're, on the average, we're an older community, age-wise, than is, say, in East Vale, some of the Corona Norcos. This is my coffee shop, Kramer's Coffee Shop experience the other day, with some two fine gentlemen that are upstanding Riversiders, but heck no, Tom, I don't want a school bond. I think I got them around, but did you look into that part of it, and does that factor in your advice to us?
That factors in a number of ways. The first one is already talked about, the sampling. So to the extent that your electorate is older, right, it would naturally play out in how we sample from your electorate. And what we tend to find is, all other things being equal, obviously, older individuals are more likely to be registered to vote. They're also more likely to cast ballots. Where you see that difference is plays out, I think, in particular, in the difference between your June and November ballots, right? Your June numbers throughout this poll are anywhere from about 6 to 9 points lower in support than November. And that has everything to do with the changing demographic profile of that high propensity June voter versus the larger group of people who show up in November, right? And the people who show up in November are not only the June people, but it's all the folks who are not very disciplined voters, right? But they're going to cast a ballot in the presidential election. And that group of folks tends to be a lot younger. The things being equal, they also tend to be more liberal, more tax-friendly. And so that's where we definitely took it into account, but it doesn't play out as much in November as it does in a lower turnout environment in terms of your age profile.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You have a question?
It kind of tags along with Mr. Hunt's question. I was looking at it, and I should have asked it sooner, but I noticed that you use a telephone survey. How accurate is that? And do you use landlines? I know that I hardly ever, when I get them, I just turn them off because I don't like them. So one of those crotchety old voters. But so how accurate is it? Because it's already skewed. Millennials use cell phones. Then again, they don't vote. So
the good old days, and I'll say that was about 6-7 years ago, was when you could use telephone-only interviewing and use landlines and be highly accurate with that approach. Obviously, a lot has changed in terms of the way people access information, are used to taking these types of surveys, and one of the big changes is that migration over to cell phones. We interview cell phones at their appropriate percentage, just like we do landlines. And so we capture that. Earlier when I was talking about the sampling methodology, the other piece to that that is really important again is that if I call somebody and they do what you do, let's say, which is you don't answer your phone unless you recognize the number, I can replace you with another randomly selected individual that shares your profile. And it's that profile that is so predictive of how people vote in the aggregate that we can be highly accurate, even though we have situations where there are some people who won't participate and won't pick up their phone. What we tend to find is, I mean, the margin of error on these polls is plus or minus 5%. We tend to be within 3%. And that's actually pretty stunning when you think about the fact that these polls are happening well in advance of what Election Day is happening. And part of that is because, you know, we tend to work in environments where once we've done our polling, you have firms like TBWB who come in and they really reinforce the predispositions of your voters. And so at the end of the day, they're helping ensure that you're matching what you're seeing in terms of your poll results, or sometimes even beating your poll results based on that kind of communications and outreach.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we looked at the support levels by different tax rates. You know, at this point in the poll, we transitioned to a couple of questions which are not directly related to the bond, but are nevertheless highly relevant. The first is we ask individuals just to tell us how they'd rate the quality of education provided in the Riverside Unified School District. Would they say it's excellent, good, fair, poor, or very poor? We ask this question in part because what we find is that, you know, voters are going to make a decision about this bond based in part on what they see in the bond, but based in part in how they feel about you as a school district. And the better they feel about you in terms of your number one job, which is providing a quality education, the more likely they are to support a bond measure. And so we ask that question for that reason. We also ask it because it's a good to find out how many voters out there don't know enough about you as a district to be able to form an opinion, right? That you're just gray area to them. They don't know. And what we found is that, you know, overall you had about 52% of your likely voters say that you do an excellent or good job in providing a quality education. You had about 21% who said they were fair. You had about 11% who were poor, said poor or very poor, and then you had about 16% who said, I don't know, right? So one of the communications challenges moving forward, you know, is to help fill in that gray area for those folks. These are probably individuals who don't have kids, you know, in the district, and maybe never had kids in the district, so they don't have a lot of basis upon which to make a decision or have an impression from you as a district. And so we want to leave them with an impression in terms of the good things and the successful path that you've been on from an educational standpoint. Similarly, we ask about how they'd rate the job the district has done in managing its finances, right? Because obviously a bond measure is about coming to the voters and asking them to support and raise their taxes to help support local schools. There's a relationship between somebody's willingness to do that and how they feel about your performance in managing your finances. Here we see, again, another mixed picture. You got about a third who said you're doing an excellent or good job. You had about 24% who said fair. You had about 15% who said poor or very poor. And then you've got 28% who don't know, right? And again, doesn't surprise you, right? Most voters have other things on their mind when they get home at night other than trying to figure out, you know, the financial performance of the agencies that are in their area. But nevertheless, again, it creates an opportunity moving forward in terms of communicating to your voters about helping them understand the good work that you've done and the smart financial decisions. And also in the past, I think you have an impressive track record in terms of getting matching funds, things like that help them understand you're good stewards of their tax dollars.
Tim, I think you just said it, but I think that big gray bar is a good notion there on that slide of why we want to spend some energy actually getting to the voters themselves before you make your final decision. The environment around bonds in general is different today than it was the last time you were in front of them. There's a lot more public scrutiny around them, maybe even a slightly better public understanding of what it means to issue bonds, and some questions. And so even though they obviously love what you do as an agency and they care about what you do as an agency, we probably need to lay down some information for them so that they understand how well you're doing it and how accountable you are for what you do so that they can feel confident in what's really a financial proposal, not just an educational proposal.
Okay. At this point in the survey, we transitioned to what we call the projects and programs section. And the goal here is really twofold. The first is to start now to educate this respondent more about what this measure will accomplish. Up to this point, we've only had 75 words to describe the bond. Here we get to unpack this bond into a variety of different projects, and in that way, we're helping educate them more about what it's going to accomplish. The other thing it allows us to do is understand where your priorities are, or their priorities are with respect to how you might spend these bond proceeds. And so for each of the items that you see there written in truncated form on the left, we simply ask individuals, would you favor or oppose spending bond proceeds on this particular type of project? And they're sorted here from high to low based on that combined percentage of those who said it's either strongly favor or somewhat favor. And probably the biggest takeaway here is there's no shortage of things on this list that are popular, right? We do them in a random order, both for this as well as the arguments, and anything that you see in a battery format like this. Every respondent, it randomly generates the order, and that avoids a position order bias. But so if you look down the list, even the lowest rated item there, you had 2/3 of voters say that they would favor spending bond proceeds on that list. But when you look towards the top, what you see is a pattern that we see in a lot of communities, which is voters like a multidimensional bond, right? They tend to not be as strongly supportive of a bond that just does one thing. They like the mix of things. And so the mix that we see here are sort of a balance of repairs, career technology, ADA compliance, safety and security, technology, all of these things. So it's a mix of, on the one hand, bringing your older schools up to the same standards as newer schools, introducing classroom technology, repairing and renovating those facilities where it's required, and helping students with career technology and STEM, these types of things. And so the nice thing is sometimes we do this list and there's some things at the bottom of the list that voters really don't support, and you have to make some tough decisions about whether you put that in your bond. Here we don't see that pattern. Everything you're considering using bond proceeds for is supported by your voters.
As well. So there's two conclusions on this slide I also want to draw your attention to. The first is that this is really good news in a way, because it means that very straightforward conversation about what your needs are is going to be effective. There's not a lot of politicking necessarily that has to happen around this. This is a question of good planning, articulating what your needs are, and then talking about them. And you can see in the middle of the pack there's something called replace, repair classrooms and buildings with safe modern facilities. It means older classrooms and buildings. You can see that the passion mark, the dark green bar, is 10 points lower than some of the items above it, which shows us that we probably want to be a little bit more specific than that as we talk about it. And so are the public materials that we've provided. And as you get deeper into your facilities master plan, it'll give you the chance to be that specific. However, the other thing to be cautious about is, as Tim pointed out earlier, we want to be remembering what the value in the classroom is for these items. So, for example, the second item from the bottom, which is a refresh classroom technology every 3 years, probably, if you look at the sort of weakness of the dark green bar, that's probably the least popular item on the page. Up much higher near the top is 1, 2, 3, the fifth one down, upgrade classrooms, labs, career facilities, computers to keep pace with changing technology. That's a reference to how you actually are using technology in an instructional setting rather than actually technology for its own sake. So we want to be thinking about wording and nomenclature that shows that in effect, rather than sort of the one towards the bottom that kind of just sounds like the thing for its own sake. So we'll have to kind of be cautious about that as we proceed. But otherwise, the speaking points are very straightforward here.
Mr. Hunt?
Thank you, Ms. Alvey. I have a question on I'm sure these weren't just particular to, even though you worked with Haley on this and she told you her thoughts, but I'm concerned about the upgrading gyms to improve student health, where it gets a 40 versus a 33, 41 versus 33. Is there a way to, and as we go forward, and I'm asking you to answer now, but to think, all of our high schools except for King were built before Title IX, so we didn't have, young ladies weren't in sports at that time. So we need to find a way to address that question a little better. And I do think, too, Dr. Hanson, when you, and Mrs. Alavey in particular, when you look at upgrade facilities for visual and performing arts, there's a, where it gets a 42 versus a 36, there's a case for our PIO working on a story about +2 and getting the word out about +2, which really tells why we're doing these things, both of those items, gyms and performing arts. So I think there's a lot we can derive from this, but I just wanted to have you think about working with Ms. Calhoun on going forward, how do we address, let them know the reason we need gyms is we've got twice as many young people on average wanting to do sports because there's females involved.
I mean, I think that these numbers don't show that we can't talk about those things. I think they're positive enough here, as Tim said. I mean, in some districts where we would see those much lower on the list, and we've even had districts where we've had to go to them and say, I'm sorry, if you want to pass this bond, you have to take your athletics out because your community doesn't want to pay for that. That's not the case here. Your numbers are strong enough for that. I do think we probably wouldn't want them to become the main driving public force behind it.
Yeah.
Because while they are critically important to those communities where they lack them and where there's inequity, you want to address that. But the driving force is really a college and career readiness, and then repairing the 40-year-old schools, classrooms and labs, and incorporating appropriate instructional technology. And those are universal to all students in all places, and that's where your voters really want to hear us talk about. But we don't have to be afraid of those themes here, unlike in some districts.
Thank you. Good answer. Appreciate it.
Mrs. Cloud.
I had a question. Actually, maybe you could clarify something for me. I should have noticed it when you were saying it, but I was looking at the initial ballot test and how many people say definitely yes and probably yes. But then when you get back to the quality of education, our quality of education and financial management, we're not getting good marks. So tell me why people are willing to, the perception there is a little bit disconnected to me.
I think there's a couple of things that go on there. Number one is there's more uncertainty, obviously, among voters about, as we said, some voters don't know enough about the district to be able to venture an opinion about the performance that you have in either providing a quality education or managing your finances. Interestingly enough, nevertheless, when they were exposed to the 75-word ballot statement, you had 72% support. What that tells you, right, is you have an electorate that, although they may not know a lot about you in some cases, are nevertheless committed to the issue of having quality schools, right? And so you have this really strong natural support from that group, and that's great. One of the things that, we sometimes work with school districts where the initial ballot test isn't great, right? That it may even be below that 55% threshold that you need to be successful, and it becomes really a building exercise to get up over the 55%. Because the natural tendency is for them to just kind of hesitant, they're not really supportive of it. You have an electorate that's different, right? The natural support is there. That natural response at 72% is great. And so the challenge becomes really reinforcing that, as opposed to having to build to something better.
So really what we need to do is just emphasize our good results, and it should be even higher than 72%.
Well, what we tend to find is that you want to reinforce that, right? 72%, again, it's an exceptional number. There are very few instances, I probably should have mentioned this at the outset, there are very few instances that I've ever seen where we have an initial ballot test over 70%. It almost only happens with schools. I've done 300 revenue measures. I can't think of a non-school related item, with the exception of maybe one or two hospital measures, that I've ever checked in at 72% on initial ballot test. So it's an exceptional place to start. You're probably not going to build a lot from there, right? But you don't need to. It's more about reinforcing that.
Even under the old formula, it would pass. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So now at this point in the poll, we transition to what we call our argument section. And the idea is, as you... Oh, I'm sorry. What's the question?
I'm sorry. Those buttons are not working tonight when you push them to talk. This is Lock Dawson.
So I wanted to go back to the messaging part and the getting the information out. And I'm curious, since you're a survey firm and you do statistics, Have you ever looked at other districts, like look at other districts compared to ours and see how much bond funds were raised and spent like on a per capita basis and broken down according to different variables like geographically or test scores? And the reason I ask is I'm working on a state bond and I've done some other ones before too, and we found that particularly geographically that our area was really getting left out in the cold with the amount of money that was being raised and spent. So I'm just curious, like particularly with our subgroups and our demographics, is there any way to quantify that and show that perhaps they haven't gotten their due in the past and we're helping? Because I think that would really help with the messaging.
And I don't have any data in terms of looking at other districts and comparing them to yours in terms of how much money is coming down versus others. I don't know if anybody else on the consultant team does. But one thing I will
get it pretty easily, though, I would think.
But what I'm going to piggyback that or transition that towards is to talk about that issue, right? And there's this. We saw a lot of this, particularly when the state was falling down on their responsibilities to provide funding for schools. And the natural reaction from members of board members and staff was to say, we want to go out to our community and tell them, the state's really not living up to its obligations to us, and that's why we need to, raise taxes. And what you found consistently from a research perspective is that's a bad strategy, right? Because what it tends to do is it generates the emotion you would expect, which is people are angry at the state of California for not doing that, but they don't tend, then they feel like they're having to reach into their wallets and purses to bail out the state out of their responsibilities, and it kind of backfires, right? So even though there's a ton of truth to that argument and making that point, it tends not to generate the reaction you're looking for, right? And instead, what we find with any type of tax measure or bond measure is that you really want to be forward-thinking and talk about, here's what we're going to be doing in terms of the benefits to the community and what we're going to build and what we're going to accomplish. And obviously, here's the price tag, and talk about it that way. The more you bring in that state, it becomes this really fine line that can ultimately sort of backfire.
Oh, I wasn't talking about the state so much as just looking at like districts or the districts around us, so I didn't want to confuse it with the state of California at all.
Okay.
I was talking about our school districts only and school districts and their spending per capita, per subgroup, and maybe divvy that up by test scores or demographics or geographics, and you can see that there may be some disparities between who's raising and who's spending. That was my question.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and sort of the comparison that we have had in some districts is to say, look, when you look around us, for example, this school district and that school district has raised bonds, they've passed parcel taxes, their spending per capita is higher, and so we need to be doing the same thing. What we tend to find there, again, is that voters are really not compelled by what their neighbors are doing, right? What they want to know is, what are you going to do? And you have to put a solid proposition in front of them that make the convincing case that there's a need here for this and that this is what we're going to accomplish. And that tends to be a much more productive conversation with the voter than sort of looking at comparisons. I don't know if you found difference. Okay. Sure. Okay, so as I mentioned in the poll at this point, we get into what we call our argument section. And the idea is, for this to be a reliable measure of community support for your proposed bond, we need to know not only where they are today, which was that initial ballot test, we need to know what's going to happen once they're exposed to the type of discussion and debate that's going to happen in your community about this bond come election day, right? There's going to be advocates of this measure. They're going to stand up and try and convince their neighbors to support it. You might also have opponents of the measure who will argue to their neighbors about why they should not support this bond. And voters are going to be exposed to that discussion and debate before they vote. And so we actually simulate that kind of discussion and debate in the poll by presenting both positive and negative arguments. And what you see here on this slide is the list of positive arguments, where the nature of the question is supporters say blank, you insert a positive argument. Do you think this is a very convincing, somewhat convincing, or not at all convincing reason to support the measure? And what we find is that just about every argument we tested really resonated in a positive way with your voters. In fact, they all tested it with over 70% saying they found it to be at least a somewhat convincing reason to support the measure. Some of the top sort of themes that step out of this are that it's a wise investment, right? When you invest in schools, you're not just investing in schools, you're investing in the quality of the community and in your property values. There's an argument, the number 2 argument here was an equity argument, that many Riverside schools were built more than 40 years ago and need facility repairs and technology upgrades. It's time to make essential repairs and upgrades so these schools can serve our community well in the decades to come. We also have arguments around accountability, right? Making sure that voters understand that if they support this bond, their tax dollars are going to be well spent. So a lot of the nice aspect about this, although Jared mentioned that the bond itself, just the particulars of what you're going to be able to fund really resonate with your voters, and you don't have to do a lot of spin, right? We do also find that there are arguments that could be leveled by an independent campaign that would further bolster support for your measure.
Excuse me, before we go on to the interim ballot test, there's a request for a short break.
Well,
so I'd like to
Sorry.
All right, I hate to bother you, stop you right in the middle, but let's break until 6:30, shall we?
Sure.
Thank you. Board members, if I could ask you to return to your seats. For board members' information, the speaking button is now working. So when you have a question, please go ahead and use your speaking button. And I think we stopped at the interim ballot test.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
So in the space of the interview, by this point, voters have heard a lot more about this bond measure, right? They not only had the initial ballot test, we talked about the possible tax rates that could be associated with the bond. We also then went on to describe in more detail the projects as well as positive arguments. So we circle back to them and we say, okay, now that you've heard a bit more, where do you stand on the bond? And what we find is that support is actually very steady. It actually ticks up 1% to 73% support. You had 20% who said that they would oppose, and your not sure group shrinks a bit to 7%, as you might expect. At this point in the survey, there was not a single subgroup that was under 55%. Every single subgroup that we looked at supported the bond at 55% or higher. And we also did find that June universe continued to check in with support levels that were below November at about 65%. Now, I mentioned the positive arguments. We also test negatives. We want to make sure that we understand that should you have an opposition campaign that goes out there and tries to dissuade voters from supporting the bond, that we have some sense of what impact that might have on support for your bond. And so we test a series of negative arguments. We test fewer negatives than we do positives because that tends to be what in fact happens during a campaign cycle. Your opponents don't have the same voice, the same resources, the same organization that the advocates do. And so we simulate that by testing fewer negative arguments. But the negative arguments we do test tend to be hard-hitting, right? They're what we typically see from opponents of bond measures. Now, once we test the negatives, you can see some of these get traction. The ultimate question is what happens to support for your bond once you've been exposed to the negatives.
Mr. Lee?
Is there any thought given to competing bonds in the same election, how that can influence the results? Because I don't see that on here.
Yeah, the way we look at it, it partly depends. Every election cycle, there's something else on the ballot, typically, right? And so we want to pay attention to what are those other measures. Statewide measures tend not to hurt you, and in some ways they can help you because everybody's talking about, hey, there's a statewide bond, and this bond allows us to get the money we need to be able to get matching funds, and so that tends to be a boost. When you have overlapping local measures, it kind of really depends on what those measures are and how much competition you might see between them. I know Jared and I have worked in situations where we had 3 overlapping bonds in the same district. We were successful with our measure, the other 2 failed, and so you always want to kind of keep an eye on that. At this point, because it's a baseline study and we don't know exactly what election you're going to be on as well as what's going to be on that election, we look at this just in terms of your measure. Down the line, if as you're moving towards either June or November, you always want to pay close attention to what else might be on the ballot, anticipate if there's going to be a competitive factor there, and get a gauge at that point of how much impact that might have.
I would say this also. I mean, I think it's a good question. The tricky part for us with looking at a Prop 39 election is we really only have 2 choices in 2016. We can go in June or we can go in November. So there will be some other things on the ballot either time. And so to a certain degree, we don't want to overestimate in our polling. For example, in November, gosh, there could be 15 statewide measures easily on the ballot next November. And it wouldn't really make sense with your voters to ask them all that in the poll. You'd get halfway through your poll, you wouldn't even have asked your question. So some of that we just are going to have to live with, whether it's a June environment or November environment. And some of, again, what we'll work on together as we proceed here are some of the pros and cons of those various environments. And some of that will depend a lot on, this is quantitative research you're getting here, but what my colleague Joy is going to talk about in a little bit here is the qualitative outreach that you're going to get when you talk to folks in the community with that stakeholder engagement, and we kind of hear from them. And that'll give us another layer of assessing June versus November.
Now, after the negatives, we circle back one more time and we say, now that you've heard more about this measure, where do you stand? And what you find is that the negatives do drop your support level a little bit, as you would expect. But even after the negatives, we had 69% of your likely November 2016 voter universe say that they would support this bond. You had 24% who were opposed, and you had 7% who were unsure. The June universe checks in lower at about 62%, so still above that 55, and still a very respectable score, but still about 7 points lower than the November universe. Okay, so what is
Mrs. Cloud has a question. Mrs. Cloud.
Well, I always get kind of late, but go back to last negative statement. Can you help me say, I'm not sure what you're meaning. District cannot be trusted with?
Sure.
District cannot be trusted with tax?
Remember, this is where we put our opponent hat on, right? And we're anticipating what an opponent of this measure would say, and they don't necessarily have to be true statements. And so the argument was, we can't trust the district with this tax. They will mismanage the money, right? Very typical of the type of argument against a bond or any tax measure is they're going to cast doubt on the agency's management of those funds. And so we test that negative argument. And what you see is that about 50% of voters, it resonated with them to some degree. That doesn't mean they don't trust you, but remember, I'm going to borrow a phrase that Jared is going to always seems to attribute, says I say quite often and has borrowed it on occasion. That is, we're taught as Americans not to trust government, right? As good Americans, we're not supposed to trust government. So when you throw out these kind of anti-government kind of arguments, you tend to get a knee-jerk reaction, right? They tend to say, oh yeah. But the reality is, how much does that actually affect support for your bond? Not much, based on what we saw at that final ballot test.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, but then the statement should read, right, district cannot be trusted with taxes, money will be mismanaged. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We truncate these arguments for the purpose of getting on the slide, and sometimes the grammar gets lost.
I understand. I'm just kind of picky about that because we're an educational institution.
Understood.
And I wouldn't like it to get in the paper with something that I don't understand. So, no, that's just my English side.
Gotcha.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay. And so we saw the ballot test at 69%. And so I'm going to go to the conclusions now, and I'm going to circle back to that overarching question that is really the main purpose for why we do these studies, is to understand if it's feasible to move forward with a bond measure. And by feasible, I mean if the board were to choose to place a measure on an upcoming ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of being successful? Clearly, the answer to that is yes. All of the pieces that we want to see in place for a measure to be successful and feasible are in place here. We saw that voters perceived that maintaining the quality of education was among the most important issues facing their community, and well above that issue, preventing local tax increases. That translated into very strong natural support for your bond. On the initial ballot test with just the 75-word ballot statement, you had 72% support for your bond measure. That's very high compared to the types of measures that we typically see that ultimately go on to be successful. The projects that we tested, the things that you would spend the money on, were popular. We saw that the positive arguments resonated, and importantly, at all of the ballot tests, right, at each point in the poll where we tested support for your bond, including after the negative, support was well above that 55% threshold. Now, these are exceptionally strong results, right? But it's also important to keep in mind that a poll is a snapshot in time. It's not a crystal ball. And I mention that because I actually get a little nervous when we present support for a bond and poll results that are this strong, because what happens is two things sometimes. One is people get greedy, right? They see we've got 72% support. You only need 55% for a Prop 39 bond. Let's crank up the bond amount. Let's start pushing the tax rate above what the community said that they were comfortable with, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a quick way to go from 72% to 50%, right? So you don't want to be greedy. You want to be realistic and listen to your voter community about what they said they would like to see in this bond, and that includes the tax rate. The other thing that can happen, and it's probably even more dangerous, is you get lazy, all right? You look and you say, our bond measure poll told us we had 72% support. That's great. Let's just put it on the ballot and walk away. That's also a recipe for disaster, because what you find is that as strong as your poll results are, it's always an uphill battle from here to Election Day. You need to invest in making sure your voters are educated about the decision that you're asking them to make. And so there's still smart decisions that have to be made, and there's a lot of effort that goes into a successful bond from this point forward. So with that in mind, there's a couple other bullets I'd like to mention. The price tag. One of the real important decisions you'll have to make is at what price do we set this bond? And I'm not really talking about the aggregate bond amount of $390 million. I'm talking about the tax rate. So what is the tax rate that you would go for? Based on the research right now, we're seeing a tax rate somewhere between $39 and $44 per 100,000 of assessed valuation is within that comfort zone of your likely November voter. In terms of election dates, we've talked a lot about how November has a natural support level among your voters for your bond that's anywhere from 6 to 9 points higher than June. All other things being equal, that would say go for November. But actually, what we'd advise is keep your options open. Right, because we don't know what's going to be on the November ballot versus the June ballot yet, right? And you would be wise to move forward in a way that if you decide that June's where we want to land, you still have the option to do that. So keep both options open for now. And then finally, as I mentioned, it's really important that you invest in talking to your community and helping to educate them more about this important decision that you're going to be asking them to make. And so with that, I end this presentation, and happy to answer any remaining questions that there might be.
Anybody? Mrs. Lock-Dawson?
Just really quickly, I'm glad to know we're like A students. It's a test. That's terrific. Are we planning on doing any additional polling after or moving towards? I don't know. I don't know who that's a question for.
Traditionally, what you find in these is this is a baseline poll, and it's going to give you it answers a lot of questions about should we be moving forward and how can we go about packaging our bond in a way that it's going to be consistent with what the community will support. Oftentimes, what you'll find is leading up to the point where you as a board would have to make a decision, a hard decision about calling for the bond on the ballot. You might do a tracking poll. And what the tracking poll does is now you know exactly what you think your bond should look like. You know exactly what your tax rate is. And it's really a second opportunity to say, here's the refined proposal, and are we still election ready at that point or not? So they don't always do tracking polls, but typically there's one done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your attention for that. That was a very involved back and forth discussion. I think it's very helpful for our team and hopefully helpful for all of you as well. Terrific questions and insight. The next portion of the discussion is about the financing scenarios that went into the voter survey. And then we're going to talk about the long-range facilities master plan. And I do want to give some context to that quickly before Adam and Tim get up here and speak about. They have just a couple of slides regarding that. Tim has definitely talked clearly about what the poll shows us about the tax rate and the bond authorization amount. I made a mention during his presentation that there are a number of factors that kind of go into picking the right tax rate. And at the end, I know Tim is also talking about price tag, and I think all of us are in the camp of wanting, obviously, to put a successful program together. There is, again, this balancing act between what the data says this is the 55% tax rate, and Tim's job absolutely is to be as conservative as possible about that. Adam and Tim Carty are going to get up and explain a little bit about some of the challenges for the speed of accessing funds for you, and that's a bit of a political balancing act for us because there are some factors that go into you being able to access funds once we go to the voters and talk about all these exciting projects that you want to do. And so they're going to talk a little bit about the $53 tax rate that we tested in the survey. I know they can talk about the 39, and they can also talk about the $60 maximum that Mr. Hunt asked about earlier. And so that we're going to be thinking about that range. You're not being asked today to pick one of those. We have lots of time to think about that. But there are several factors that kind of go into that balancing piece. And frankly, maybe that is also one of those balancing factors that goes into our eventual June versus November consideration as well.
Mrs. Cloud.
I just had a quick curiosity question where you're showing the voter-approved general obligation bonds in districts around us. Were there any that were not approved that you know of?
I'm sure there have been, but this is Adam and Tim's slide, so maybe it makes sense to get to them. That's okay.
I was just curious. I mean, it looks like this area has a pretty good rate of response, so if there is a lesson in there, what, Dr. Lewis?
Yeah, Mrs. Cloud, I can say that about 80% of the school bonds across the state are passing. So in the Inland Empire, it's even higher.
Thank you.
I would say quickly that Tim's points, I do want to take Tim's points seriously. They don't, nothing is automatic, right? It's a lot at stake. It's, you know, so we want to make sure that we move forward in a prepared way with, you know, with good choices. So it does happen that people aren't successful, but the process that we've embarked on, I think, gives you a good chance of being confident if we continue to execute our steps.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll introduce your finance team. Adam Bauer from Field Monroe, oh, Tim Carter, excuse me, first from Piper Jaffray.
Good evening,
Hello.
Madam President, members of the board. So I'm Tim Carty from Piper Jaffray, one of the members of the district's finance team, together with my colleague Adam Bauer. You've heard a lot of information, a lot of detailed information tonight. So what I thought I would do is shift gears a little bit and just give you a little bit of the overview of what you can expect over the next year or so as you lead up to a decision to put a bond measure on the ballot or not in terms of the finance portion. I'll talk a little bit about the big picture and then turn it over to Adam to give you a little bit of detail. So I think the best way to think about it is if and when you vote to put a general obligation bond measure on the ballot before the voters, you will be, as part of that, approving a financial package. And that financial package will have a handful of building blocks that will be components of it. One of them is the overall bond amount, whether that's $300 million or $400 million or whatever that number is. That's one of the building blocks. Another one of the building blocks is the tax rate. There was a question from Mr. Hunt, I think, about that subject. So it was a unified school district, as was pointed out by Dr. McClarney. The maximum that we can ask voters to approve is $60 per 100,000. We might choose to ask for that. We might choose to ask for something less than that, but that's a building block. The third element, the third building block, which is something that Jarrett was just describing, that sometimes is overlooked, is the phasing in of the money. Most school bonds, almost every school bond, the school district does not get the money all in one shot. It takes time. The lower the tax rate that we ask voters to approve, the longer the time horizon over which we would access the funds. So that's a building block, whether we're going to strive to access all the money within 8 years or 6 years or 10 years or whatever that is. So that's going to be a building block. The fourth item is the length of bonds. And I think the point was made earlier by Jarrett or by Dr. McClarney. You know, bonds have changed. There's a lot more emphasis nowadays on fiscal responsibility of bonds and the cost effectiveness of bonds than there was before. There was the last time that Riverside Unified School District went to the voters. So even though bonds, for example, can still last 40 years, a lot of school districts and a lot of school boards are opting to make them shorter. Maybe more like a home mortgage, 30 years or 25 years. The other item is to the extent that we use bond funds to finance technology purchases. If we're going to use bond funds to buy computers or to buy projectors or to buy things with a relatively short life, we want to make sure that we can tell voters like the ones you ran into at the coffee shop that if we're going to do that, those bonds will pay off in a short period of time. We're not going to take out 30-year bonds to buy a 3-year tablet. So that's a building block, the length of individual bonds. And I'd say the final one is the assumptions that go into the bond package. So you have the amount, you have the tax rate, you have the phasing in of the money, you have the length of bonds, and there's also the assumptions. Some school districts have gotten into a little bit of a pickle with bonds because of having too aggressive assumptions as to growth in the economy, growth in the tax base. So those are all the different building blocks that Adam and myself, together with your staff and the other members of the team, are going to be working on, so that if and when you decide to put a bond measure on the ballot, you can be confident that if the voters approve it, we can deliver. And it'll be based on prudent assumptions, it'll be fiscally responsible, and it will do right by the taxpayer. So again, no decisions are being asked for you to make tonight or really anytime soon, and there may be different versions and different drafts of the final bond plan that'll come before you for your consideration before anything is placed on the ballot. But I wanted to just give you a sense of what the components are. And one item that I did want to spend a second on is we talked about tax rate.
1 minute. Mr. Hunt?
So I'm sorry, Mr. Hunt, did you have a question?
Okay, no, please go on.
So just one item that we thought might be of some value for you to see is, if you looked at your surrounding or some of your surrounding school districts here in Riverside County that have passed bonds, and if you looked at what taxpayers in those communities are paying today for bond tax rates, in comparison to what Riverside Unified School District taxpayers are paying, you can see. So we have Corona Norco Unified, we have Alvord Unified, Valverde Unified, Moreno Valley Unified, and then the two Parises, the elementary and the high school. And Riverside Unified is obviously the second in from the right. So as you'll see, as it sits today, we're on the low side in terms of what taxpayers are currently paying. And even if we were to add all the way up to $60 per 100,000, we still would be within the mainstream. So a number of these districts have passed multiple bond elections, have passed multiple bond elections since the last time we passed a measure here. So again, just in terms of thinking about taxpayers and the cost effectiveness and fiscal responsibility of a bond measure, I think it's good to know we're on the low side of taxation, and even with a new bond, we would be in the mainstream. So again, just trying to give you an overview and some things to think about. So if there's any questions for me, happy to answer them. If not, I was going to ask Adam to give you a little bit more specifics about a couple of potential bond options that we might want to be thinking about, again, based on the results of the poll. But Mr. Hunt, did you have a question?
I think you're about to answer it, but let me just, if this doesn't get covered, not that I want to, but outside of Prop 39, what would be the percentage required if we wanted to go beyond the 60?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So a school district can still opt, under the old rules, to go for two-thirds.
Two-thirds.
So under two-thirds, there's no $60 limit. There are a few other differences between two-thirds and the 55%, but to go outside of Prop 39, two-thirds would be the required rate of passage.
And what you were describing earlier, Mr. Carty, then is sort of a scenario we would have different bonds cascading at different times.
That's right. The typical school bond program, the bonds are accessed in different tranches, cascading over time, maybe once every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, to try to deliver the money to meet your cash flow needs for the development of projects. And at the same time, one of the reasons we cascade the bond funds is to try to maintain the tax rate and spread out the repayment burden over time to keep that tax rate at the recommended rate.
And so what we're going to hear, I'm asking you to help set up the architects. Their idea, working with Dr. Lewis, then is we may have priority A, B, and C, but B has a longer design time and approval time at the state, so maybe you put that in your second or third tranche.
That's absolutely right. Maybe one group of projects requires DSA approval, others can be more quick start. All of those things go into Adam and my working with the architects to try to mesh the cash flow needs for the projects with the delivery rate of the bond funds in a way that maintains the tax rate at the politically acceptable level. All those things go together.
Thank you, Mr. Carty.
Mrs. Cloud.
I'm just kind of curious. It's taken us quite a while to spend all of our money with deliberate and careful consideration. And so, since, let's look at Valverde, they had one in 2008 and 2012. Did they spend their money that quickly? Is that what? How does that work?
Well, sometimes school districts have not necessarily spent all of the money from election one, and then they go out for election two. And I think that's actually, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, what happened with Valverde Unified. I don't think they've accessed all of the money from the 2008 election. I think it was a different set of projects, and they went back out to the voters. Is that what happened there, Adam?
So you can do that? This money is for this project, and this bond money is for this project, and simultaneously be using that?
Yes, and there are districts that have done that, that have more than one live bond program, if you will, because they were for different sets of projects. So you can do that.
Yeah. Very interesting.
So I would imagine, Dr. Lewis, to follow up, we went on Measure B, we grabbed the 175 because it was a case of showing we had the matching funds. We didn't put them in different sets.
Mr. Hunt, it was also looking at the assumptions with assessed valuation and the valuation within the Riverside Unified and all the timing issues that Tim mentioned. So the 175 was actually a max for us at that point in time with the tax rate that we felt was politically acceptable.
But it's a whole new game now with the state not matching, isn't it?
We don't have the matching opportunities that we had with Measure B.
Thank you.
What, can I just back up on that? So actually, we got a lot of leverage for that money that we had because we had so much matching funds, which this time around we don't have.
That was actually the real promoter for Measure B, is that we could leverage our local dollars to get to the state dollars.
Right.
In fact, we leveraged that 175 with over $330 million worth of projects.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Adam, you want to cover the next couple of slides?
Before we move on from slide 23, there's one more thing I want to point out in this slide is if the majority of general obligation bond programs anticipate some growth in the taxable property of the district. So if you show a pattern of 6% in your district history, you might show a debt service increasing by 4% to try to capture some of that growth. Riverside Unified thus far has been fortunate enough to not have to anticipate growth. We have a zero growth factor, whereas in reality, over the last 10 years, since this bond program has been in effect, we've had a 3.59% increase. So unlike other districts, Riverside Unified's current tax rate will decline every year as the taxable property of the district increases. So this slide gets even more in contrast as the years go by. And so with that, if we turn to the next slide, we looked at primarily two different tax rates. We looked at two different tax rates. We talked about the maximum tax rate of being $60 per $100,000 of assessed value. And when we look at that, if we started issuing bonds either late 16 or early 17, the program would begin then and end in 2025 with the last bond issue, and we would generate $382 million for projects over that period of time. And I'm not counting any potential state money. This is just from your general obligation bond program. And this would be through a phased bond program. In this scenario, we look at 4 bond sales. We assume assessed value grows at about that 3.59% that I told you is your average. And like I said, we complete in 2025. And the bonds, and that last series would then mature 30 years after that.
Mr. Bauer, didn't they say that one of the considerations from the poll was to stay within the 39 to 44 range?
That's correct. We've run several scenarios, and I'll get to that scenario as we go through. Another one we looked at was the 53, and that's where we have a $340 million bond over 2016 and 2025. Now, Dr. McClarney had referenced a $40 tax rate, so I will circle back to that one now. And with a $40 tax rate, or about that 39, that program would be about $250 million. And so there's comparing the things that Jared has referenced and also your facility master plan is finding that balance between the tax rate and the things that you look to fund. But we have looked at all those scenarios, and we highlighted the two that we had here.
That's fine.
Yes. So those are all the financing slides that we prepared. Both Tim and I are available for questions.
Are there any further questions?
Well, thank
Not
you.
right this second.
Mr. Mueller, I know you started it and you inherited it and now you got it. Isn't our maintenance needs in the six figures? Yes, thank you. Easily, yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Calhoun. As you can see, there's a number of parallel processes that are going on at this time, and she'll talk about the master planning process.
Definitely saved the best for last, I think. So what can I say? I am very grateful for the very, very smart bond team that we have. They've done an exceptional amount of work and really helping us to move forward and be successful. But I have to say, it's my architects that I'm working on the facility master plan that are absolutely brilliant. And I'd like to take a moment just to introduce them so you can see who they are. And then if you do have any questions for them, they certainly will take questions, or after the meeting, they'll be happy to answer any questions. So from WLC, they are master planning for Poly and Ramona High School cluster schools. They are also our lead agency. And here today is Jim DiCamillo, and he's going to be speaking in just a minute. From DLR Group, they're master planning for Arlington and also our non-school sites. That includes the Central Registration Center, the Grant Educational Center, the Operations Center, and the district office. We have with us tonight Kevin Fleming and Michael Stevens and Patty Ashton. And then from HMC, they're master planning for Martin Luther King High School cluster. We have John Nichols and Sandy Kate. And then from Runau and Clark, master planning for North High School cluster is, we have Scott Griffins and Lance Nolan with us here. And Roger Clark and Paul Gill were also here, but they had a previous engagement they had to head out to. So I'd like to welcome them all, and again, they're available for questions if you have any specifics. We've probably completed about 80% of our first round of meetings with school sites. So our first round of meetings really is with the principal and a few key personnel like team leaders. Then we plan on circling back again with the entire staff and then with the community. We'll do some community outreach later. So why do we need to do a facility master plan, a long-range facility master plan? It really is important to look out a number of years as we start planning for our facilities. We look out about 15 years with the facility master planning, and it really is visioning with the staff and the principal about their program initiatives and implementation right now. And so our part with facility master planning is how do we have facilities, what facilities do we need to ensure their instructional program so that they can move forward with the initiatives they have and implementation that they have. We also want to look at our facilities in lieu of our LCAP goals and Board of Education priorities. We also are looking, as we're moving through our facilities, is looking at all of our ADA access, our Title IX. Your question about gyms, certainly we're looking at that to make sure that we have addressed all of our Title IX issues. And then seismic risk, that's always a priority as well, to look at our seismic risk. And then we also look at how do we right-size our facilities. So many of our facilities were built for a certain number of kids, and now they have X number of kids. And so what facilities do we need to add to make sure we're properly housing and we have the facilities needed for the number of students they have now? And one of the things we do, and WLC is actually preparing this for all of the architects, is what we call educational specifications. And it really does look at a single we have a number in mind, if you will say, for elementary, you're looking at the number of 750 kids. So what would a facility look like that would house 750 kids? Now, we know not all our facilities have 750 kids. Some have fewer, many have more. And so we would take that ideal, if you will, and then we multiply it up to the number of students that we are housing at a certain site. For instance, Kennedy was never built to house 750 kids. It was always built to house like 900 students. So we know that. So we adjust accordingly to make sure that they have the same right-sized facilities for 900 students that it was built for. They're actually sitting at about 1,000 now, but, so those kind of things will come into play as we move forward with our facility master plan. And then also, I just wanted to make note that this process of long-range facility master planning is really a conceptual plan. It's not a design plan. We're not designing the new multipurpose room or the new gym or the new classroom wing. We are conceptually planning what our facilities need to look like and what they will be in the next 10 to 15 years to meet our program objectives.
Mr. Hunt?
Ms. Calhoun, could you help me just a little bit on this? First of all, we talked a few meetings a while back. You were helping us with projections of growth, and pretty much, do the board understand that, are we correct in saying that probably RUSD, except for some infill here and there, and we know at the very eastern end, our High Grove area, there's going to be growth with 1,000 homes there or so, right? Eventually, that.
Right. They're moving in phases, but yeah, Spring Mountain Ranch. They're doing 250 homes in each phase, and they will only open the next phase when one sells out. So we're still in that first phase, actually. They've got about 220 homes. But that Spring Mountain Ranch and then Lake Matthews area actually has some growth,
right,
too.
Right, Lake Matthews, you're absolutely correct. So, way to go. What I'm wondering is just help me understand, when you walk onto Poly's campus, because my girls went there, I'm very familiar with it and all, and Poly was built 50 years ago, or finished 50 years ago this year. It was built for 1,500 young people with 2 lunch periods. There's about, how many kids there now this year?
24 or something, 2,400.
Okay. So are you looking at, I'm assuming you are, but I want to hear you say it. Are you looking at the quality of, I don't say life, but the atmosphere of learning from lunch to classrooms? Are you looking at those things as well? I mean, if you go to Poly on a hot day like today, unless you can crowd under that crummy old tree, there's not much you can, or that one little lunch area. So are you looking at those things as well and taking into account the crowded situation and the landlocked, the way we are there?
Absolutely, and we've actually had our meeting at Poly. We've had we've had about 80% of our staff meetings, like I said. We are looking at quality of the student environment, not only just the facilities, but yes, the overall campus. Shade structures are one of those things that are coming up. Covered walkways are coming up. Benches outside, more usable space outside, creating a classroom outside. All of these things are being looked at, and certainly looking at what the school was originally built for versus how many students are housing now and how their facility needs are or not met based on those students. Absolutely.
2 other questions, if I may. One, would you talk a little bit about our need for our technology backbone, not the pads, but just making sure we have the coverage and the Wi-Fi and the reliability. What are some of the things that you're finding out about that, just briefly?
Actually, we're doing pretty well in that department. We've done a lot of summer work where we've increased the broadband at several of our school sites. But individually, we're asking every school site how their coverage is, and we're finding overall we're doing pretty good. But we know there's got to be growth in that area because as we continue towards a one-on-one devices, right now our average is like 4-to-1 devices. Now some schools have 1-to-1, some have 4-to-1 or less. But as we know, as we want to move towards a 1-to-1 device, we have to keep up with that infrastructure. So that definitely will be looked at and is continuing to be looked at and part of the plan.
And then lastly, this board and your good superintendent and chief academic officer have made your life a little more challenging, that UCR could possibly be interested in having a campus on their campus. So how are you in WLC addressing that what if, may if type of thing under this?
So actually, DLR is working with STEM, and so what we have chosen to do, because we're moving closer and closer to having the 912 in an alternate location, whether it's UCR or that seems to be the direction the board is moving, and so we're looking at the 15-year plan at the current STEM site for 5 through 8, but certainly it can be adjusted in any way that we need to move forward in that direction.
But you're looking at alternates for 9 through 12.
Absolutely. STEM's going to be a little tricky on that one because we are kind of in flux right now with our program. We know we're moving 9-12. I mean, we're going to move 12th grade onto STEM next year. So we have to plan for that, and we're moving forward with that plan because that also, even if we do choose tomorrow to do 9-12 at UCR, it's still going to take time for plans and DSA checks and all of those things to happen. So we have to adjust for the campus as it sits and as it will sit probably for the next 3 to 5 years. So that's part of the plan.
And I apologetically don't always feel as strong about UCR just because I don't trust Oakland as much as I do UCR. But are you looking at, as you know, this board, this administration recently purchased two lots, 10-acre lots, both next to high schools. Are you considering anything there? Are you doing any dreamscaping there for STEM?
We have talked about that consideration of the properties by King and by Poly. We haven't yet given them a determination of what the usage might be until, again, we have some further direction. But it's not that it hasn't been talked about, believe me. Both of those sites have requested opportunities to expand their campuses or use those properties. But that will be like an alternative plan, if you will, until this board makes direction onto what we're doing with those properties.
But wouldn't you say in the next year, we really need to, no pressure, Ms. Lim Carmenday, in the next year, we really need to sort of have a yeah or nay from UCR whether we're going to end up there or not. This board member, as you know, strongly does not support a full 512 campus at Hyatt, or whatever we call it now. And I don't think physically it can be done. But I would think, and I would hope, it's just one board member, that we're keeping Plan C, whatever, for the STEM school in the mix. Sounds like you are, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, we are. Certainly, it's got to be part of our thought process and our visioning process, and that's where we're going with that.
Great work,
Mr. Hunt, if I might just jump in here and add, we're very much aware that the next thing that comes, remember in the memorandum of understanding, it was to continue discussions with the chancellor and with the provost, and so we're continuing down that path about a shared use of facilities or a lease build option, whatever that may be. Certainly no decision's been made. They are fully aware of our desire to possibly do a bond in 2016. They're fully aware of our desire possibly to have as part of our bond something on their campus. And so as we continue to work with them and go further down that path, we'll know for sure if we can do a lease option or a shared facilities option, but right now it's in the discussion. And so that time frame actually, in our last meeting with the provost, has been the next 6 months we need to make a decision.
I'll be the happiest pessimist, and there is. I'll even paint my face half like they do, blue and all that if it happens. But maybe because I'm sitting in Dr. Beatty's old seat, I'm a little bit hesitant about UCR, only because of Oakland.
Absolutely.
I'm just a homeboy, that's what it is.
But locally again with the chancellor, very much
You're
fully
doing a
aware.
great job, David, and I appreciate it. So we all do.
All right, I'd like to bring Jim up now to talk about the role of the architect.
Everybody need to stretch, or are we okay?
We're okay.
Good evening, everybody. Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Hanson. I'm Jim DiCamillo. I'm president of WLC Architects. I was told the other architects would all back me up with a barbershop quartet thing, but I don't know if they're ready. My job is to just explain a little bit about long-range facility master planning, because there can be a lot of questions about what does all this mean, what are the deliverables, what are you all doing, you have 4 firms doing this. Let me make it really pretty simple, if I could. Our job as the architects, I use this analogy or picture all the time. My wife and I watch HGTV, and you get to see Home Hunters. I don't know if anybody watches Home Hunters or House Hunters or House Hunters International. And in that show, basically what happens is people will look to move, sometimes to Paris or Nebraska or wherever. And they're going to go out and look for a house. And the first thing they do is they will go in and they will meet with a realtor in that community. They'll say, well, we want a 3-bedroom house, blah, 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 blah. I want a view of the ocean, all this sort of stuff. And inevitably, the realtor tells them they can't afford to live in Paris. It's always a very strange woman. But the last question that he or she always asks the home hunters is what? Does anybody know?
Price.
Yeah, what's your budget? Every single episode, the exact same thing.
I watch it.
What you have here is a team of people, and I love the presentation in the order that it's been given, because we're the people shopping for the house. The architects, we're the ones shopping for the house. The people you heard from so far are the people that are shopping for the mortgage. So they're looking backwards from a dollar amount. We're looking upwards, if you will, from doing nothing, from literally not spending any money. What needs to be done? Where do we want to live when we grow up? So a long-range facility master plan needs to be done somewhat void of the whole concept of dollars, underlined somewhat. We're looking at where does the district want to go with their facilities on a long-term basis. We're not counting catch basins. We're not looking at tree roots that are pulling up a piece of pavement somewhere. This is a roadmap for the next 15 or 20 years of where does the district want to go. And it's not really a bond document per se. It is a map of a facility improvement plan or a picture. If you could look into the future, what would your facilities look like? So we look for issues of things like parity between sites, or as Haley mentioned, right-sizing your facilities so that a school, that there's not equality but parity of facilities. If I'm a third grade teacher at XYZ school, if I move schools, will I find similar tools to do my trade at a school across the district, regardless of its age or even enrollment sometimes? So that's long-range facility master planning. Where are we now? We're strictly in the harvesting of information. The architects are out doing a lot of listening, and hopefully you as board members might have run into somebody in the produce section of the grocery store who said, hey, a bunch of people were out at the school hearing, or listening to what we were saying. That's good. That's what's happening right now. We don't have any plans yet, and honestly, we won't for weeks yet. The listening period is still going on. I always say I could walk around your schools for weeks as an architect and not know what the people who live there, kids, teachers, faculty, know about that school, just as you mentioned about the high school. So that's the phase we're in right now. Haley mentioned earlier that we're also, the final product of this are not designs of buildings. That's not long-range facility master planning. Somebody one day, an architect, or one of these very talented people sitting here, will be hired to actually design a building. You're not designing buildings right now. You're just setting standards for what you might think would happen. The final product of the master plan will essentially be diagrams of each site. I call them idea boards, basically. They're an idea of a roadmap of where might things happen on the school. You want to develop this essentially like you develop the strategy for a chess game. There's a new movie about Bobby Fischer coming out, so that comes to mind. Nobody ever won a chess game with the first move of a pawn. It's impossible. You want to establish some moves on each campus that will get you where you want to go. The Riverside Unified School District is not going to cease to exist in 2030. This is not the end of your facility master planning. This is one pace on a long journey your facilities are taking. So the master plan wants to look at ideas about, if we do this now, are we tearing asunder something we want to do later? Bigger idea picture thinking rather than smaller concepts. You want to know that once you hire an architect there to do a project, say a bond passes, say something happens and you have funds to do these projects, are you doing them wisely, logically? Are you getting in the way of something that wants to happen at that campus long term? I tell districts all the time, you can't access enough money to bulldoze the whole district and start all over again. That's impossible. You're nowhere near that amount of money, not even with $60 per 100,000. So the needs, and I don't like the word need assessment, is essentially almost limitless. It's a bigger number than you could possibly imagine. We're not doing a needs assessment. You have needs that are into the billions, I'm sure. We're doing a master plan of those chess moves that we can see about 15 years out that will be smart, strategic master planning for this district so that your schools look more the way you want them to in the year 2030 than they look in the year 2016. And that is a very involved process of strategic thinking with a lot of moving parts. So I don't want you to think, is there going to be a red building on the corner of Magnolia and whatever? No, that's not master planning. That's architectural design. It does involve two elements, that master plan diagram and cost estimating. And so together with the brain trust of architects that I have working with me, we'll be doing estimations that have to take into account global estimating, dollars per square foot of new construction, renovation, whatever, and taking those things into account, and then marrying them up with your finance team who's shopping for the mortgage while we're shopping for the house, to say, how can we do this and how can we implement this plan so that things like inflation and escalation don't eat us alive in the process of doing it. It's a very complex process. And somebody mentioned earlier about the strategy of doing it. The hope is in the end that you as board members, when you are thumping on that cantaloupe at Vons, although I'm told it's actually a muskmelon, when you're thumping on that cantaloupe, that you'll be able to tell a constituent exactly what the story of your funding plan is. It should be a 2 or 3 sentence story. Here's what we're doing and why, and here's the order in which we're doing it. Now, if Tim was here, he would tell you that you don't actually have to phase the bond in the bond. There's no requirement to actually lay out a phasing plan for the community. That's not part of the ballot measure. But you as a district may choose to have such a plan so that you have a strategy of how you want to move the pieces on the board, if you will. So one less thing to take pressure off. I did bring an example, and I'll just hold it up for a second, of just because people want to know, what's this look like? What's a diagram look like? Let me give you an example. I just filmed about a 4-minute intro video out in your courtyard before the sun went down with your public information officer and his team. This little DVR video will be played by each of the architects. Somebody said, well, you have 4 architects working. How's that going to work? Every meeting will be preambled with a video with me giving the same message, and some members of the community, hopefully the superintendent will chime in, so that everybody who comes to one of these meetings, no matter what school you're at, hears the exact same message of why are you here, what's the input we're looking for, and why. I filmed my piece earlier today. Ultimately, what they'll be looking at each meeting is really, and we've provided, WLCs, we've provided these for each of the architects to bring to each of the sites. They'll be looking at this is not your district, so I whited out the school. We'll be looking at basically a big aerial photo of the school. It's a great information starter for the people there, and they're able to look at this and talk to the facilities so that the people at the table will all be able to give input on. It's always funny, the play fields always look terrible in these shots. They're nothing other than Google Earth. The ultimate answer in the end, as I said, is this is the exact same school. After the meetings is somewhat of an idea board. It lists the projects that were described by the people in the meeting and shows a very simple, easy to read, colored diagram of what is the plan long-term for that school. It doesn't mean in this particular site, at this particular district, and it is the same school, that everything there is going to get done. It's just saying, don't put a building here because we plan on building a building here one day. So when the principal of the school asks for a portable next year, you say, well, don't put it there because the long-term master plan is to put the new math and science building there, if that helps. So that's what long-range planning is, and that's what everybody is setting out to do. I'll close with this. Everything in the master plan does not need to be in the bond. In fact, it's quite normal and expected that the master plan will be larger than what your bond is. In fact, it should be. Because as Dr. Lewis said, there are other sources of funds that can add to your bond. There are projects that may evaporate in the next 20 years, and you decide to do something else, so you need to be able to pull something else, to use the football analogy, off the bench and bring another player in. It's perfectly fine, and you'll see this in a few months, if your master plan is actually larger than your bond. In fact, it's to be expected that it would be. In fact, it could be, the master plan could be much larger than your bond. That will end up with you eventually prioritizing projects that go into the bond. But once again, there is no statutory requirement for you to specifically list the projects that will be funded out of the bond. Your requirement is only that you're going to go out for a bond for so much money, and that basically the projects you'll be pulling from to play the game will be projects that are listed in your master plan.
Good. Well, we have a few questions. My first question is it common to have so many architectural teams working together?
It's done, yeah, I would say it's done all the time depending on the size of the district, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're all operating from the same hymn book that WLC is kind of organizing, but these people are all very talented.
Mrs. Lock-Dawson.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. So I'm trying to figure out what your main inputs are then. They're listening sessions with community members, right?
First one is almost strictly listening. The architects will do more speaking once we've created a little bit, here's what you told us, here's what it looks like, what do you think?
And do we have a schedule for those and a targeted area and who we're focusing and who's being invited?
There was one set of meetings that's already occurred with essentially there's always a cadence to this as to how you sort of unpeel the onion. The first meeting has just been essentially with the principal and anybody they wanted to invite, kind of the inside story of what's going on at the school. The next meeting is going to be with a larger all-call to the community to come and
are
their
we
input.
having multiple ones of those, or is this?
It depends on the site. More complex sites will take more meetings.
Okay.
Simpler sites, less. We're not there to beat people over the head. If you get consensus pretty quickly, it may be that only 2 meetings are required. Yes, you listened, you heard what we said, it's there, we're good. Yeah.
So I guess that's a question for Haley too, is I'd be interested to see what that schedule is and when you're going to do it and who the groups are. Second, so then I guess too, you are doing site visits, the architects are, so they're looking, just assessing what needs upgrading. And then other things too, like our housing predictions and our population growth, that's driving it as well?
Yes, all districts are different. We work in, all of us do, all the architects here, work in districts that have major growth components. And so you're not just dealing with fixing a quad that exists, you're talking about building a school that doesn't even exist yet. So all districts are a little bit different. You're a little less on the building new schools at Riverside. And more on
okay, but you
right-sizing your schools. The answer is yes.
That's a variable you're considering. Okay, lastly, when is the last time we did a facilities master plan, and did we have high fidelity to it? Was it completed? Was it,
the last time would have been before Measure?
Yeah, the last time was with Measure B, and it was a much less robust process than what we're utilizing now.
Okay, so we can just kind of assume that the Measure B expenditures, the budget sheet there, it reflects the master plan. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Ms. Allevy. Jim, to help me out on a couple things. One, this board, and 3 of us go back to when I first got on here, Mrs. Allevy, Ms. Cloud, and myself, are very concerned, and so do our new members share with us, equity. When I came on, when it comes to sports facilities, Arlington was going to get $1.4 million, where Poly and North were getting $9 to $10 million. So how are we being sure about, or how are you ensuring the equity part of it? And I want to just tag on to that. When it comes to equity, you have different firms. I want to go to your hymn book a little bit you were talking about. I think we could arguably agree that our elementary libraries don't look much different than the one you walked into in the first grader and long before when I walked in. So we're going to be looking at those. How are we going to be sure that one group isn't doing a Nordstrom's library, future library, and one's doing a Walmart, with all respect to Walmart? So go with that first.
Here's what we're doing. As Haley mentioned, we're preparing essentially a generic ed spec that I've been meeting with district staff on downtown that's looking at the basic program in a vacuum. If I was going to have a 750 student school, what should be part of it? How big should rooms be? All that stuff. The architects are taking that and measuring their schools against it. So this is not who screamed the loudest, and it's not everybody gets it's not a scavenger hunt or whatever you call that. Everybody gets $1, proof to me when you come back what you bought. That's not what this is. This is trying to get to an end result of not equality, but parity of delivery of instructional modes, because it will be different depending on the size of the school and everything else. We're meeting collectively as architects throughout the process. So nobody's going away for 6 weeks and coming back and saying, hey, they want a whatever at this school. No, we're meeting regularly and bouncing ideas back and forth. It's very, very organized. I have to hand it to your staff. This is so far pieces. Yeah.
Okay, next is, you've come before my committee, with mine and Mr. Lee, to begin this process, and I know we made this clear. I didn't quite hear it, so do tell me that in these groups you're looking at, that teachers and custodians are part of the input group.
Yes, and people at the district level as well. Part of my little preamble we taped out there, I always talk about it this way. There's 3 audiences that we're talking to. One is the community, who, as somebody said earlier, may not even have kids in your school. They're looking for different things out of their school. Right. The second is the district staff, and they're looking at your buildings more like a fleet of McDonald's. They want to know the parking lot isn't bumpy and the roof is going to keep you dry in a rain. They're looking at the facilities from a backbone standpoint. And then the third is those people at the site who know the school like Scotty knows the engines of the Enterprise. They can feel the pulse of that school, and they'll tell us the things that, again, I could walk around forever not realizing that they don't have a door from here to here, and that would have helped for the last 20 years. They've been going around the hallway. So we're looking at all 3 of those levels, and all 3 of those from we've met with M&O at the district level, we've met with technology at the district level, we'll meet with the custodial staff at the site level. Yeah, all of those constituents are being heard from.
And your industry, I'm sure, is very, along with your peers, is very aware about individualized learning, Common Core, and how that changes the delivery of, so okay, good. And lastly, on your, I want to be sure to mention to Justin, please, in these clips you're doing, that's great. I think this board would very much like to be represented by Mrs. Allavi on making some of those comments.
Well, that'd be great.
On behalf of the board. And I want to remind you, Mrs. Calhoun, that the voters of California, and therefore the voters here, also approved that we go in the trustee areas. So I may love old John W. North and fought for their stadium, but I need to know what's going to be going on in my area just as much as Mr. Lee is going to want to know what's happening over at Jefferson and Ramona and so on and so forth, and Bryant for Mrs. Cloud. So please don't leave us out to the very end when you go, ta-da, all right? So, all right, good.
And somebody mentioned, it's quite common and encouraged, not to be at everyone, but if you, since you're the 5 people on the planet who do the cesarean up or down on this thing, you're more than welcome to come to any of the meetings with any of the architects and sit in from time to time and just kind of hear the kind of dialogue that's going on. I think you'll find it, my experience is very refreshing and open to hear the kind of dialogue people give us at these sessions. They're great think tank environments.
Well, we're proactive people, but she knows it's also a good idea to not forget us and maybe brief each one of us individually or some other way just to let us know. I want to be sure that I don't want Arlington to, again, end up with 1/10 of what Raleigh was getting now that I'm responsible for it to them, okay? So thank you, Mrs. Calhoun. Thank you.
Last thing I'll assure you of is that your document will be short. We are not intending to produce 6 3-ring binders that you as board members will be asked to look through to make a decision. A long-range facility master plan should be brief, easy to access, and quite accessible to you or the community to look at for the basic tenets of what's trying to go on. Okay?
Just a quick question about your timeline. The second picture you showed where you've visioned out what it's going to look like, is that drawn after all the meetings have taken place?
No, it's drawn after the first meeting. This is this particular example.
That sort of what concerns me, just this.
No, hang on.
Okay.
It's drawn at this one that I showed you is another that's in process right now. That was drawn after the first meeting with that community. Then we take that board back and say, here's what you told us. Here's how we interpreted what you told us. What needs to change? And then that will be updated at the next meeting.
So let me get this straight. The first meeting's with the principal.
Is just listening.
With the principal.
Yeah.
And a few key people.
Right.
Then you take that back for the whole community to look at, correct?
No, the first meeting's with the principal, we're just listening. The second meeting is with the community. Again, we're just listening.
Okay, that's
Then
what
we
I'm
do the
hearing.
diagram. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we meet with them again and show them the diagram and say, here's...
Community input before
Absolutely.
fancy artwork.
Yep.
That's just what I wanted to make sure. And yes, we would like to have a list of the meetings that we could attend. So if anybody wants to give us a list, I'm sure there were several of us who'd like to attend those.
Mrs. Allavi and members of the board, I'm including the schedule of those meetings in the mail out every week. The community meetings haven't been scheduled yet. They're still working through the principal meetings and the staff meetings. but I will be filling that chart in once those meetings get scheduled.
Great, thank you very much. Anybody else have any further questions?
Well, I was going to say, many people ask why the principal first, because they are the site administrator, and it is sort of polite to have a sit down with them before everybody starts asking questions in their presence, and they haven't heard
Sure.
any of this yet.
I'm
just
good with that. I'm good with that.
And so the next thing is just a timeline, talking about when we plan on finishing this. September through November, of course, we're continuing the site visits. November, December, they'll be preparing their findings and planning their recommendations. January, we'll be presenting a draft, and then in February will be a presentation of the final. Again, we meet with the architects as a team, all the architects, every 2 weeks. So absolutely, you're welcome to join us in that dialogue. It's very interesting. They are a dynamic team, and we do share what we're hearing out there, because and I do want to keep you apprised, absolutely, what people are talking about and what they're asking for at the different sites.
So Haley, am I hearing this correctly, that we cannot decide before February whether we're having a June or a November election?
That is, I'll let Jared or Joy, actually, Jared and Joy are coming back to finish the presentation, so I'll just let them start.
All right.
Quickly on that, and we can circle back to that topic if you like. You're not required to make a decision about that until February, which is the cutoff for when you can talk about June.
Okay.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Hansen. I am Joy Tatarka. I work with Jared Boygan at TVWB Strategies. And so we start looking at bond planning timeline and the next steps. You did just see this is sort of finding the right. You did just see the architects and the master plan and what that timeline looks like. This is really about public outreach and engagement from now until January 2016. The voter survey gave you information about how people are looking at it from a quantitative outreach way. What are people thinking right now? We're looking now at the qualitative outreach that Jared said earlier. And we want to begin to get that feedback from those groups out in the community, whether it's internally through your PTAs, principals, teachers, staff, and your oversight committee members. Those conversations have already begun to happen, and we are working with the staff and the team to continue using those and continue going forward. And we've created some documents to help with that as well. And then we encourage you to also begin looking externally. These particular measures are about uniting people around shared priorities and values. And in this case, it's education. So we want to help you build on those relationships with your community. And we really believe that this is all about, ensuring transparency and letting people know as you plan for the bond in 2016. We're also, the outreach committee is a group that we'd like to help the district work to pull together the superintendent's key advisory group. And it would be made up of local business, local government, staff, parents, and students to help do some of this outreach. We can take some of that information and use that to get information about planning, such as whether you also look at a June or a November election, and Jared will go through that with the last slide. This is just some example of some of the materials that we've prepared. We do have a one-page handout. I know it's not particularly clear here, but I do have some copies with me too that I can share with you, as well as it's just a front and back FAQ. Again, that's really about making sure that we're all kind of using the same language as we begin talking about this bond measure, and so we have that united message as we go forward. So these are some of the materials that we've already started to prepare.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
And finally, this is a bit of a timeline slide, but I think we can also use it as a jumping off point for a discussion if there's some questions on this topic, which you may have. So January to February next year is really we have to make a decision in that window about June versus November because the deadline for actually calling a June election is early March, and we obviously want to have that decision basically in hand before that, so all the necessary legal materials can make it to you. There's a facilities master plan, and then there's a bond project resolution, which encompasses a lot of things in the facilities master plan, but it's different than that document. It's a legal document that you'll be asked to vote on as a board. That date is early March. And so what we'll be doing in the early part of the year is analyzing all that community feedback, as Joy mentioned, the qualitative, not just we've got good quantitative data that you heard tonight from Dr. McLarney. The qualitative feedback from the community is just as important, and we need to understand that and make sure that we feel good about that. There has to be some campaign readiness. Quite frankly. There needs to be a community group that's willing to step forward. Obviously, the district can't pay for any advocacy activities, so you need to feel confident that the community energy is out there and behind you and ready to mount a campaign. We can, as we discussed earlier with Dr. McLarney, do a second voter survey to finalize ballot language and just kind of update the numbers. By then, they'll be, several months, 7 months old about. So, it may make sense to do another survey then. And then obviously you want to make those final kind of transparent steps out to the community. This is what the final measure looks like. Here's what's in it. Make sure people know those things. So that's what what January and February look like at that timeline. We can talk a little bit about some of the factors that go into making that decision. And I don't have a slide for that, but I'll kind of run through them just quickly because I know that's on people's minds. As Mr. Lee mentioned earlier, the November ballot's long. There's a lot on it. The polling that we saw tonight is further away from next November than it is from next June. And so, the further out in time you get, a little bit cloudier, those poll results are, although they're obviously much stronger they're very strong for November, they're strong for June also. Sometimes that long ballot encourages people to think about a June election because there's a lot in November that you won't control. Obviously, local elections will have an impact on that, but also federal elections and state elections will have an impact on that. The economy can change more, over that time, just kind of the further out in time you get. There's a lot of uncertainty unless you control. We did see, as Dr. McLarney mentioned, first, the factor of polling. We do have a 7 or 8 point cushion with our poll numbers for November over June, so that's obviously a factor for us. We would test it again in a tracking poll. The electorate looks different. That's the second major factor we would look at. Again, Dr. McLarney spoke to this a little bit. A June electorate on the natural might be about 28 to 30,000 voters in your district that would cast ballots. In contrast, this coming fall, it's probably something like, might be 18,000 on the natural in an off year. So it's a little bit bigger than an off year. But the presidential election could be as many as 85 or 90,000 voters. It's a much, much larger electorate. So there's some differences to that electorate. So, for example, by age, we talked about this earlier, that June primary on the natural, it's about 2/3 55 and older. In November, it's less than 40% 55 and older by most modeling. So that's a significant difference. It's a much younger electorate. Party registration also, in November, it's about evenly split between Democrats and Republicans on the natural. In a June electorate, it will be at least 6 points more Republicans than Democrats, and actually, looking at what's happening in the federal surround, it's quite possible to imagine it's more Republican than the average primary electorate, because very interesting Republican presidential primary going on right now. And there's also some chance that the current presidential primary on the Republican side could attract some unusual voters, people who aren't typically in the model. I think that's possible. Latino voters, you'll find probably 26% of our voters will be Latino in November, but maybe only 15% in the June primary. So there's some factors that go into demographics. And then we'll look at the political surround, and I think that kind of gets to the presidential primary question, also local elections. November, it's likely that some of the competing measures, a state bond has already qualified for the ballot. That can be pro or con for us because it does show the possibility of state matching funds, but it is another bond measure. I heard this week that CTA is submitting signatures to extend Prop 30, so it's possible that that measure could qualify for the ballot. So there could be lots of other school funding measures on the ballot in November. So we'll have to kind of weigh the pro and cons of different political surrounds. And then obviously time is the other question. You've had a good start. Lots of progress has been made. Certainly we feel, our team feels we could be confidently ready for June, the way things are proceeding, assuming the qualitative feedback you get from your community leaders is positive, both the external as well as the internal. But November, there's more time for that sort of thing. So those are some of the factors that kind of go into that.
Yeah, I was thinking that I was concerned about the short period of time from March to put a committee together of community leaders and to raise any amount of legitimate funds that you could put to use before the June ballot. Is that generally the short time window that people use when they're doing a June ballot?
I think you have enough time to do that here, but again, it really depends on how some of this community outreach continues to go. I mean, we have to feel very strong response and readiness from the community in order to feel good about that. There's enough time, but we have to have good.
There's a couple questions. Mr. Lee?
I know the survey was done polling the likely November voters. Is there any way to extrapolate from that information what the results would be or how they would differ if you polled likely June voters? I mean, I know you gave me the demographics, but more precisely, if you asked the same people who would more likely vote in June, what the numbers would look like?
Right, and I think Dr. McCartney might have gone through it verbally, but he went through it very quickly. There was a subset of those voters who are November voters within the polling sample who are June voters, and when he focused just on them, he found them to be about 7 to 8 points less supportive than the November voters, but still in that 62 to 65% approval range for a potential November bond. So they were north of the 55% threshold, but south of where the November voters were. And then because it's a smaller subsample, the margin of error for the June-only voters is a little bit higher. So there's a little bit more uncertainty, numbers a little lower, but they were above 60%.
And then based on your experience in these polls and working with other districts for a similar ballot measure, for a community that has similar demographics to us, how has the polling changed after you've done a campaign? How have those numbers changed? Like what percentage?
Well, Valverde is probably an interesting example. When we started working with them, and Joy worked more closely on this project than I did, but we started working with them back in 2010, is that right? Yeah, 10, 11, getting ready for 2012 measure. And originally they were aiming for the primary, but the numbers said that they couldn't proceed in the primary. Their polling support wasn't adequate, so they aimed for November. Then they began a process much like the one Joy described of community outreach and engagement. When they came back into the second survey in January, they found that their numbers had actually gone up enough that they were able to proceed to the ballot in the primary of 2012 and be successful. So it can be that with community outreach you can strengthen numbers or you can make an impact on those numbers. With numbers that already start as high as your numbers do, I think we really are looking to solidify support rather than drive it up. I don't know that you could go much higher than 72%, honestly.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get at, to me, it sounds like there's a lot, to me it seems like there's a lot less noise in the June election and a lot less clutter, because I think there's going to be a lot of things on the ballot that could distract from what seem to be already strong polling numbers. So I'm just trying to find out how these numbers would differ if you went in June. Again, it's a very temperate climate, so you never know what can happen tomorrow. The longer you wait, the less likely these numbers are accurate. Thank you.
Mr. Hunt? Do you have a question?
I did, but I think it went out of my head. No. I should know this, but I don't, Dr. Lewis, Prop 39 vote, is this just residential, is this commercial, multifamily, and industrial? Just residential?
Ask that question again.
The assessment we're talking about under a Prop 39 vote, is it just on residential, or is it on multifamily, commercial?
It's on all properties, all parcels.
Properties.
And I wanted to answer a question that Mrs. Alvey asked earlier. As a board, you do not have to wait until January, February to make a decision of whether we go with June or November. Short of calling for the election, which I'm not asking and I wouldn't suggest you do, if you would prefer to give staff direction to proceed to a June or November election, we can adjust our time frames to support that. If you were be asking me for a recommendation, I would say November for all the reasons that Jared had mentioned. We have a 9-point swing if we wait till November. The demographics look better for us, and I think most importantly, we have more time to put together a good plan to take us all the way through. And that's certainly up to you.
There's, I think, one more factor in favor of the November option, which is some of the tax rate mechanics that Tim Cardy and Adam Bauer talked about earlier, and Dr. McLarney. He talked about there's some tax rate sensitivity in the polling. That's probably less sensitivity in the November election than there is in the June election. And there's very good reasons for you as a district in terms of getting your projects completed in a timely fashion after your bond is successful to, want to be a little bit in that 50s range of the tax rate rather in that high 30s or low 40s range of the tax rate. And, we probably lower some of the risk associated with that in a November climate than we do in a June climate. So in a sense, by waiting a little bit, we probably gain a lot more time in the back end.
Mrs. Lock-Dawson?
Thank you. I brought this up before, but I can't remember what your answer was, but it's very likely that a state bond, a school bond will be on the ballot in November. It's most likely going to go by initiative. I'm fairly certain that's going to happen. In your experience, or have you seen this, or the impact of that potentially? I mean, you get that fatigue going and all that sort of stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly not uncommon. There have been several state school bonds. And in our experience, voters actually, it doesn't work against you. They do recognize the local bond as long as there's a strong campaign presence and some local visibility. They recognize that as local money that stays in the district as opposed to state money, which they don't perceive as coming locally. And then it does give the local campaign a talking point of qualifying for state matching funds, which, again, in the last few years, that was a hard argument to make because the state really didn't have any facility money. But if there's a state bond on the ballot, that's a very real argument.
Mr. Hunt?
Just to add on to that, the state bond is not a tax. And so we can make that very clear and a distinction that it's not an extra tax that they're going to see on their property taxes. It is a bonded indebtedness to the general fund. So, and I think the real point is we say that we have matching dollars that we can leverage our local bond dollars with. And so that's where there's an advantage to it.
Okay. Mr. Hunt?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Alvey. I can't think of a strong case why we should even consider June. Everything that's been said tonight, including Mrs. Alvey's comments about trying to raise the right amount of funds and community input. Part of my question, Dr. Lewis, was about the commercial is that, we've got one of the strongest chambers of commerce in the state. I certainly want them to be excited about this and behind it, and they represent, the Mark Rubens of the world and all these new industrial guys out there. So we have a lot of message to get out, and I wouldn't want a chance. And I think this will be, unless there's just two guys running for mayor in June, it's kind of a boring election coming up. But we certainly know this will be a new person in the White House come November. And like we saw 8 years ago with Mr. Obama, there'll be a turnout. So I would hope, unless, I don't know how we do it other than naughty, Mrs. Alvey, but I just couldn't be convinced about June, that's for sure.
I'm not sure we will be in a position tonight to make that decision, but it will be probably on a future meeting agenda. Is that correct? Right.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Any further comments about what we've heard? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Thank you all for all your input.
Thank you.
It's very enlightening. Learned a lot. That was good. Okay, we are now to the conclusion of our meeting, and I'll be asking members for their own board members' comments. I'll start with Mrs. Lock-Dawson. Do you have any comments?
Just a really brief one. I attended, I think I told you that Dean Smith at the Graduate School of Education at UCR asked me to serve on this advisory committee for Graduate School of Education. And it's really interesting. They have, their numbers are up for people getting credentials. I'll pass this to you, Dave, if you want to give it to folks, but their data that they show. But the thing they're really making a push for and they want are the special ed. of course, are lacking in that. It's very low, and I know there's a huge push for that statewide. And they said that you can get your special ed credential in 1.5 years there, so that's very quick. And the other thing that's very cool about it is their STEM credentials are up. I think it's like a 20th of the folks getting their credentials are getting STEM. So anyway, that was very cool.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to remind folks is that we've got our Pathways to Higher Ed conference coming up on October 3rd, and that's I don't know, Jorge Perez isn't here, but I'd love to give a shout out to him because he's just fantastic, and Justin's been very helpful with the messaging on that. So anyway, North High School, 8:30 to 1, Pathways to Higher Education.
And Mr. Hunt will be speaking at that.
Yes, I will, because I was called upon by my boss. And I'm looking forward to attending our CSBA governance, leadership and governance with Mrs. Alavi Friday and Saturday, right? Okay?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, God, please don't tell me it died already. Thanks to Mrs. Lynn Carmen Day, I have a suggestion. So I would like to, tonight that we would suggest that we close in recognition of this is National Hispanic Heritage Month, which begins September 15th, and goes to October 15th, that the Board of Education celebrates the historical, cultural, and contributions of American citizens whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central, and South America. The observation started in 1968 as Hispanic Heritage Week under President Lyndon Johnson and was expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988 to cover a 30-day period starting in mid-September and ending in mid-October. We can go into more of that. There are certainly folks I was just thinking about that have had an impact in our community of now 61%. Comes to mind and I think should be included on our website. I'm sure I'd like to find out, I think he would have graduated from the old Poly High School, but Ishmael Smiley Villegas, wonderful 20-year-old who took out 5 foxholes, helping his men in the Philippines before he was taken on himself by the 6 killed. Dr. Tomas Rivera, who was the first Hispanic to hold a chancellorship for a UC. Johnny Sotelo, who was the first Latino city council member. The first RCC trustee, Joe Aguilar, whose wife, he and Josie own Temple del Sol, or ate lunch at today, and I suggest you go by there. And that includes some good folks since then, including Mary Figueroa, our good friend, and Jose Medina, who is the first Latino to represent our area in the California Assembly. Dr. Paul Perez was the first Latino to be an assistant superintendent here. Phil, I meant to say Phil. Thank you. You must have been here at the time. Thank you, Gail. And then our first principal, Gail, I hope is Robert Flores. Okay, but Antonio Garcia follows both of them, and I know we'll do an outstanding job. But and then, of course, some of our first Latino board members include Robert Nava, Ophelia Valdez-Jaeger, and Ernie Lopez. So in that, I hope we will adjourn in that. And it came up tonight, Kathy, and I know that 6 years ago, one thing, Dr. Hanson, that Dr. Miller did that won the hearts and minds of the board was he got new microphones. We used to have almost megaphones in those days. Tim Martin was telling me at last meeting, it's very hard to hear out there. Maybe it's time for a new investment in microphones. Up to you. If we do that, I would ask you to also consider a flat screen in front of this podium, because even though we have some things in front of us, it's a little harder to see back there. I don't want to turn my back on the audience, but if I could see these items here, plus the name, if the folks in the back of the room could do this, the name of the speakers, I feel bad saying, yeah, you know, so I would hope we could do that. Haley, outstanding job, really outstanding. Thank you for all you've done on this. We look forward to moving forward. Thank you, Ms. Allen.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Just want to reemphasize something that you brought up, Ms. Alavi, about when they were going over the facility master plan and the timeline and how it'll go in terms of outreach to the community. The architect, again, would be great to have the names, the lead architect. I know he had before mentioned to us about really that, and Mays, you've done the same thing about that, like blue sky thinking. so that no one can say at the end of the day, I didn't know I could ask for that. So I just hope it's really clear and it's made very clear everywhere and consistent that people can ask for anything. Obviously, whether or not it gets done or not is a different story, but I don't want anything to get left behind or people feel like they're limited by the idea that they have in their head. And I don't know how we can accomplish that because I know that there's only going to be so many meetings. But maybe some kind of like a virtual idea box, whether we have a separate website or a link on our own website or a tangible idea box at every campus that you can drop a note card in, and they're at PTA sites. I just want to make sure it's very clear that nothing gets left off the table. And also, as you mentioned, Ms. Alavey, that board that gentleman held up, it scares me anytime you start putting boxes around ideas because then it feels like you're limited by that. And so I hope that doesn't surface until after the board has seen it and all the input is generated, because I don't want people to feel constrained by anything that they see visually or that's mentioned to them in a meeting. And I think it would be also a great idea to have a similar intro video that was created by our PIO. Sorry for more work if this idea is adopted, but that is very user-friendly. That kind of details maybe a 2-minute video on what it is that we're asking the community, teachers, custodians, lunch ladies, librarians, PTA, what kind of input we're looking for. So that's my, that's all I have today. Thanks.
Good ideas. Mrs. Clapp.
A couple of things. I want to thank Dr. Hanson for representing us well at the Chamber Good Morning Riverside meeting the other day. He did. I want to thank the staff for the committee meetings that I was at this past week. It's been a busy week, and I know you all do a lot of work, and they're fascinating, and we will be having a VAPA plan forthcoming, which to most of us up here is very exciting. The other thing I came across in the paper yesterday, many of you probably saw it, Becoming America the Not So Beautiful, Beware the Ideological Purging of a Nation's History. Very good article by Joel Kotkin, who's a professor at my alma mater, Chapman. He usually deals with data. He's very data-oriented, and I thought this was a very interesting article in light of some of the concerns we've heard. So I'm asking Dr. Hanson, and you can get it online. It was in yesterday's press enterprise. But here's a hard copy, and maybe you'd be willing to pass it out to us and whoever would like to have a copy. He quotes G.K. Chesterton. He quotes a lot of people, actually. But this is what really caught my attention. We are the only nation in the world founded on a creed. And I think it's something for us to keep in mind. It's not people. It was an idea. And so, anyway, I thought it was an excellent article, and I'm going to pass it on. Thank you.
And I would like to just close by saying I'm favoring more of a November ballot because of the time limits, but I see your reasons why June might be less complicated. I just worry that we can't get our act together, no offense, do all the things that we need to do in time for that June ballot, so it is a little concerning to me. And then speaking to your issue, Mr. Hunt, I just want to tell you that I'm very optimistic about UCR. And don't want to be Pollyanna about it, but I feel like our time is now, and all the good work that Mrs. Carmenday and many others have done is going to really see light. And I feel very good that we're finally going to have this high school on UCR's campus that we've thought so long about. I'm very excited. Tonight I would like to adjourn, not only for National Hispanic Heritage Month, as Mr. Hunt so nicely outlined, but also in memory of Laura Biedenkamp, a teacher at Highgrove Elementary. Laura Biedenkamp started in 1989. She taught at Liberty and Highgrove, and she taught kindergarten, first, third, and fourth grades. She loved fishing, camping, and hard rock concerts. She always had a smile on her face and a positive outlook, and never let her health challenges bring her down. So in her memory, I now adjourn.